date is? Good evening and welcome. This is a workshop of the Scarborough Town Council. Today is Wednesday, March 19th, and it is 5:35 p.m. This evening, joining us are members of our state legislative delegation. Unfortunately, some of them have been tied up and will be joining us a little bit late, but with respect to those who are here, I wanted to go ahead and get us started. And so I will go around and do a brief round of introductions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Drew, who is here, to give us a little bit of overview of some of the work that he's doing currently. And then I will turn it over to council questions as we wait for our other guests to arrive. And so, Drew, I am April Seither. I am the town council chair. Karen Shoup, town council.
Mark Cushing, Scott Doherty, town council.
John Anderson, town council.
Bill Donovan, town council.
Corey Fellows, town council.
Yeah, Tom Hall, town manager. Council chair, one thing we could do just to, by way of introduction, Nick is here. Nick is our direct liaison to the LPC, MMA's Legislative Policy Committee. Certainly Councilor Donovan is involved in that too. We could have him provide just an overview of that work as a way to kind of warm into this conversation.
That sounds great. So we'll keep going with introductions and then we'll turn it over to Nick.
Sure. No.
Oh, I was saying, did you want to introduce yourself? Okay, I'm Nick Cloutier. I'm the town assessor, and as was stated, I'm the district representative to the Legislative Policy Committee for MMA. The agenda materials have spoken to what that is, but I'll get into that.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you for the first time ever that I've been in these council chambers. My name is Drew Gatine. I'm state representative. I represent District 126 in the main house. District 126 is a district that was newly created when redistricting was done a couple of years ago. It's a interestingly constructed district that includes about 50% of the people in District 126 live in Scarborough. About 30% of the people live in Saco, and about 20% of the people live in Westbrook. And it's really, if you look at a map and you look at sort of the areas west of the turnpike of those three communities, it's generally that portion. I live in the Westbrook portion of the district. Again, just in terms of introduction to myself, I'll be pretty brief. This is my 6th term serving in the main House of Representatives, but my 2nd term representing part of the town of Scarborough. So it's really been a pleasure and an honor to get to know Scarborough quite a bit more than I did before. Prior to that, I did serve 3 terms on the Westbrook City Council. So I'm certainly familiar with the work that a body like this does and the challenges that you face. So really happy to be talking to you today. I imagine the focus of this is going to be a little bit about state support for local communities. Obviously something I have strong feelings and am passionate about, so happy to answer your questions or try to get you answers to questions that I can't answer. I want to say that there's been some communication among the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 members of the Scarborough delegation. This is a very busy time up in Augusta, and I think most of the members were up there all day today and are probably heading back or traveling back. I think we're going to be joined by a couple other members this evening, but this is kind of the nature of how we roll up in Augusta this time of year.
Thank you so much, Drew.
Yeah.
And coming back to me, as I mentioned, I'm the district representative to the Legislative Policy Committee. So the agenda materials I provided spoke to what that is, but to provide an overview for those that didn't read it, perhaps, it's the MMA, Maine Municipal Association, represents and advocates for municipalities across the state in various capacities, but especially with the state in order to advocate for the municipality's rights and resources and whatnot, because they have dedicated staff to do that. When you all can't make it to every little hearing in front of the committees and whatnot, they're doing that. And they don't want to just do it assuming they know what the communities want. So they have this legislative policy committee formed. So 2 people from each district can inform their insights. So when they go to these different taxation committee hearing or housing alliance, all these different groups at the state level, they have an informed opinion about, as a whole, what municipalities want to see at the state level. And you can imagine, if they're representing the entire state, it could be conflicting things or nuanced differences depending on the state. So they balance that. We have day-long meetings or hour-long Zoom calls frequently at this time of year as new bills are printed. And the bills are the different proposed legislations that are coming down from all over the state. And they're printed, let's say, 100 a week. It's fast and furious, and you got to catch up with them. And there's over 2,000 coming out this year, and only 1,000 or so have come out to date. But every week there's another 100 that MMA sifts through, sends them to me and the other policy committee members and says, what do you think about these? And we weigh in on them, provide insights about how it would affect municipalities, if at all. And then I too don't want to assume I know how it would affect all of Scarborough, let alone, our other nearby towns. So when there's an issue that isn't in my purview, I'm an expert on taxation and whatnot, but I might not know about law enforcement, for example. I'll call up or email someone from the police department to get them to weigh in, and vice versa. I've had them do that to me too. They'll say, my committees that I sit on for my profession are asking me to weigh in. Should Scarborough support this particular bill? But they wanted me to weigh in on it. So we have that dialogue, and a lot of it's behind the scenes on a case-by-case basis, but it works out pretty well because every other of the 70 delegates, like myself across the state, are doing that as well. And fortunately, it's not just, they're not all sending their assessors. There's a really good mix of people. Our former delegate was Jean Marie Caterina, and she served on that for quite a long time, and she enjoyed it. And likewise, there are some other town councilors representing different districts. There's also a lot of town managers. That's probably the most prevalent. There's also some town clerks, some fire chiefs. There's a good spread. So there's at least 2 people, if not 4, of every profession in the room. So it's a good mix. So we're never going in blind to any bill. And when I first joined, I actually asked to take over Jean Marie's seat because I have an interest in it, but it's not just a generic interest. It's particularly in taxation. And the reason why that interest even came about was I saw legislation come down from the state telling me assessors have to administer this thing that's going to be really challenging, going to cost the towns a lot of money, and it probably shouldn't have happened this way. I was like, well, if I get in on it earlier before it becomes law, I can help advise on those kind of bills before they become problematic for the town, and the town either loses money or have to administer unfunded mandates by the state. So that's just one piece of why I joined. But when I actually sat in on the first 2 meetings I've been in, I'm amazed by the broadness of every matter under the sun that this policy committee hears as the state legislature. It's not just taxation by any means. And furthermore, across the state, the differing needs, it's good to see that back and forth, but it's not partisan at all. It's more about such matters as retaining home rule, like our authority to make our own decisions, not top-down state telling everybody in the state has to do this the same way. That's not always the right one-size-fits-all solution. Is generally not the case in Maine because there's a lot of different types of communities. So that's one example. And then another one is trying to preserve our funding. So asking for other revenue streams to be provided to the municipalities so property taxes aren't so heavily relied upon in the future. And I'll wrap up my kind of introduction to this in a moment, but I also sit on a working committee about tax reform, and that's kind of a long-term issue. And, when I first went in, I was perhaps naive and optimistic that I could help make change. And I'm sure eventually, little by little, I might be able to. But as you can imagine, and what you've heard in the news, financial issues aren't the time to be asking for more money. So if there's great ideas of let's expand this exemption or give people this tax rebate, if the state has to pay for it, it may or may not happen this year. But there's other ways to do that. There's, for example, local option sales tax that isn't taking things from the state. It's creating new opportunities that don't already exist for the municipality to offset property taxes. So those are examples of things that I'm passionate about, and it's exciting to be part of. But I would also say this discussion is going to be fruitful to see what you, as the governing body, the council, want as priorities for Scarborough, not just this year, but looking forward, because sometimes you have to have a year or two heads up to actually propose legislation, or if you know your representatives are proposing bills, how to get behind them and maybe draft a letter of support or testimony in support of it. So I think this could be a good discussion. Some other towns go as far as to have resolutions of our legislative priorities are this and this and this. And perhaps in the coming years, the town council may want to decide this, but I think this is an incredibly important first step to have that discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. At this point, I'll turn it over to council discussion. I think loosely, we had kind of agreed as a body that we were interested in talking about home rule and we were interested in talking about property tax relief. But if there are other topics that councilors would like to bring up, that's certainly a open and appropriate time to do that. Is there anybody who specifically would like to get us started? John,
Yeah.
thank you.
I'm just curious more about understanding better kind of the legislative process. So I'm just wondering, Drew, if you can talk through that a little bit and maybe where you see the best opportunity for either the legislature to engage us or us to get more involved. I feel like we're kind of far through the process is my understanding right now for you guys. And so kind of going back to what Nick said, like, what can we do that can be helpful in the process, either testifying and just understand better what that looks like. I'll just be honest, I don't really have a good sense of when to jump in or how to jump in, or is a single counselor doing that effective, or is it better for us to do it as a body through a resolution? Like, I'm just curious to get your perspective.
It's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I think all those things, Counselor, again, as Nick described, you have a collective voice in MMA up there, which does a great job and is, always frequently in the taxation committee. Frequently, we have a committee now that's specific to housing and land use issues. Obviously, that's a very important topic here. We have an education committee that Representative Murphy now chairs, which makes some important determinations around school funding. I didn't mention in my introduction, I currently serve as the House Chair of the Appropriations Committee. So, ultimately anything that involves the spending of general fund money, flows through my committee, usually from a policy committee where they have the first bite at the apple. So, I mean, first thing I'll say is I think things like this are really great and like we're doing today. And maybe if this goes super well tonight, we'll do it more frequently. I'd certainly be happy to, as maybe doing something like this in the fall, as those of us who are serving are making the determination about what bills we're going to submit, would be a particularly good time for us to meet with our local leaders and have those conversations. But this is also a pretty good time too. Actually, this is, in some respects, I'm not gonna say it's early in the session, but there's an awful lot of, the vast majority of bills have not yet been processed through their committees or come to the floor for a vote. So, I mean, if there are particular things that you're hearing about or want more information about, this is actually a pretty good, opportunity for us to have those conversations. I think some people might know and others don't. In the first session of the legislature, any legislator can put in any bill on any topic. And some of the results of that are a little overwhelming, but there are this year, as there has been in the past, over 2,000 bills that have been introduced by the 186 combined members of the House and the Senate. Some of them are very duplicative, some of them are similar. I think there was a list generated, showing that there's an awful lot of Senator, you're here to bail me out. I've been filibustering here.
My apologies for being tardy.
Not at all, not at all.
Talk a little bit about our process and where we are in the session. The question was, what's a good way for us to work together, and what does a body like this need to know about the legislative process? But But again, I think there are lots and lots of bills that will be of interest to municipalities. Again, around property tax relief, around property taxes, around municipal services, and what is going to be required of public safety. Again, issues around housing and creating an environment where towns are comfortable allowing the development of housing, especially affordable housing, I think are going to continue to be very, very hot topics. And I think that if if we're not engaged in some level of conversation with our local leaders, then we're not going to be as informed as we need to be, or we're not going to have that interesting perspective that we need to have. I do think, and you're going to hear this a lot, and this is sort of the appropriator in me talking. I'm pretty proud of some of the things we've done over the last 6 or 7 years around property tax relief. And restoring the 5% revenue sharing, which was not in place for a number of years, increasing the homestead exemption, property tax fairness credit. We are now coming into a period of time where our revenues are flattening out. So things that will require costs to the state are going to have to be balanced against some other very, very important things. But we are moving forward. I don't know if folks have read in the paper with a budget bill that'll actually come up initially tomorrow that, again, retains revenue sharing, retains the commitment to 55% of local education, but also defers a lot of other very, very important decisions to later on in the session. So I think in a very nonpartisan way, the topic around property tax relief is going to continue to be a very, very hot topic in this session. And I don't know if the Brenner wants to add anything to that.
Senator Brenner, welcome. If you wanted to take just a couple minutes to introduce yourself and give our public and the council just an idea of what committees you serve and how long you've been serving, just to kind of give a little bit of a bio, and then we'll dive back into questions.
Thank you, Chair Seither. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. My name is Stacy Brenner. I live on Broad Turn Road, and this is my 3rd term in the state Senate. I represent most of Scarborough. There's also a sliver of Scarborough that's represented by Senator Carney, and then I represent all of Gorham. Some of the interests of the municipalities are similar, and there are some that are different. There are some coastal interests that Scarborough has that come up quite a bit in the Environment and Natural Resources Committee that I have been on for the last 3 terms, around permitting and sand dunes and habitat, that kind of thing. But both towns also have concerns relative to everything that you sort of just walked through. I've also been on the Veteran and Legal Affairs Committee, which is a unique space, one of the few committees that generates revenue for the state of Maine through gambling, cannabis, spirits, and lottery. I forget the lottery. So that's a unique space because it's a revenue generating space. It also manages veterans issues and voting issues and elections and campaign cycles. And then I've also been in the Health Coverage, Insurance and Financial Services Committee. I have previously had a career as a nurse midwife, and I've worked as a nurse in the health systems in Portland, and enjoyed spending time on that committee working on access issues. I've done a lot of scope of practice work for providers that are not physicians that are looking to increase their scope of practice under their license here in Maine. It's what they're educated for and what they're credentialed for based on their degree and their training, but for whatever reason, their license in the state of Maine doesn't allow them to practice whatever that particular function is. I'm thinking about physical therapists, this year it's optometrists. Hello, Representative. And also work with nurse practitioners on those scope of practice issues. So it's a little sketch of my work.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Mhm.
No apologies necessary for being late. We're so grateful for your time. We appreciate that we operate on kind of a fixed schedule and that isn't necessarily going to jive with you all's busy schedule. So again, just we're grateful to have this opportunity. Joining us just now is Representative Warren. If you want to just give yourself a couple minutes and do a brief introduction, let us know how long you've been serving, what you represent and what committees, just kind of brief overview, and then we'll jump back into council questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Sophie Warren. I'm really fortunate to represent, I describe it as a small but mighty portion of Scarborough, the coastal district. So kind of along Prouts Neck over to Higgins Beach, and then kind of coming up, there's sort of a division line. The Eastern Trail is kind of how I think of it, and then over the wonderful Pine Point area. And that's House District 124. I've been fortunate to serve. I'm now in my third term representing as part of Scarborough, and I'm fortunate to serve on the Energy, Utilities and Technology Committee. This is my second term in that work. I don't know if there's anything I've missed. I apologize if so. And my very poor excuse today is we were in some work sessions that got quite more complicated than expected. So
We can relate.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You probably know better than me. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I try to listen in when I can, and I greatly respect the really difficult, important work that you guys do for our community.
Well, thank you. And thank you for joining us. So the question that John had asked, and only Drew was here at the time, was what is kind of the best way for our two bodies to interact with one another? Admittedly, we all have some gaps in education in terms of what your timeline is, what our timeline is in terms of organizing ourselves behind, certain bills in order to provide a collective voice, and so we're trying to, figure out maybe from you guys, what do you see other communities do that's really effective? Or is there a way that we can be more effective as a body, and what does that look like?
For me to answer?
Either
Yeah, I
you
mean,
or Stacy.
I think it can greatly depend. I know in past years, I've sought specific counselors' input on certain things, especially bigger issues. Sometimes I get outreach from counselors on specific, it's usually bigger policy questions. For example, there was quite a big issue that quite explicitly had to do with municipal regulations, or the onus would have been on municipalities. And Scarborough happens to be a community that was sort of profiled as a leader in the space of smart growth and development and things. And I think one of the counselors submitted testimony in that respect. So I did some additional outreach in that regard, which was great and very helpful and informative. I think also, to be totally candid, sometimes I've sought a certain level of collaboration and had folks say, hey, I've got a lot on my plate here in Scarborough, like focusing on what's in front of me here. I don't want to take a position, or I don't have any input, or let me punt that off in the direction of XYZ person. And that's totally understandable too. I sometimes have done that with some folks here and some of your predecessors. So I'm always interested in more collaboration. If there were a quarterly meeting we wanted to think about or something like that, I think a regular check-in would be wonderful. But I also know we're all so busy, and I know I have a day job. I know others do too. So I know that can be tough, but I would welcome more collaboration. And I don't know that I'm thinking of models that would work. From other communities, I don't think I've heard of something, but I just want to credit you all for having us come here. That's something I've not experienced. I'm now in my third term, and I think it's so great. So credit to you all. It feels like you're already leading by example in that regard. So thank you for showing us out and informing us of what maybe a better work could be.
Thank you. Stacy, anything to add?
This is a great start. It's so nice to be invited, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend an hour with, or I don't know how much longer
We have an hour.
Great. I know I was late for part of it. So just appreciate the opportunity to have time with all of you in the forum for question and answer. I think that I've had some fun times working with the code department on some permitting, a bill specifically for permitting at the in active sand dune areas. That was quite fun to work on together, and it was, you know, it's fun when the town comes to Augusta and we get to have that kind of opportunity together to work on bills. So there's that sort of offensive, like, what can we do proactively together? Are there initiatives that would benefit the town that we want to lead on? And I think, you know, we're all here to make that happen. And then, of course, there's sort of all the bills, you know, there's so many good ideas in Augusta, they all get introduced. 2,500 good ideas. And then, you know, we are a little bit on the defensive, right? And so that's when it's really important for you guys to communicate with us either as council members or town individuals or from the administration of the town office. I did have also the same unique opportunity in Gorham for the first time this year, which was great. And they also included the school board, their school committee. And I thought that was a nice addition because there are some unique interests that vary between the two bodies, between the council and the committee. So not sure if they're up for it, but it'll be great.
We have our school board chair sitting behind you, nodding enthusiastically. So welcome, Shannon, you're welcome to sit at the table.
Let me just sort of piggyback on what Sophie and they said. This is my 6th term in the main house. This is the first time I've ever been invited to something like this. And in my 3 terms on the Westbrook City Council, we never invited our legislative delegation. So I think this opportunity is really special and appreciated. So thank you.
You're very welcome. I think it speaks to, and it's funny because John and I attended an event at GP Cog where, you know, I've been to several Chairs in Circles events and the topics all vary. And this year, the subject of the legislation and how to better connect with our legislation came up. And so I think that this is something that we're seeing kind of, you know, not just in Scarborough, obviously, where towns are starting to have different pressures, and we are looking to our state more and more to make sure that decisions aren't made that, to Nick's point earlier, that come down and result in us having to shoulder, you know, some new regulation or something that we're just not fiscally prepared to handle. Corey, you had your hand up?
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Piggybacking on the comment
Yeah.
about, you know, the 2,500 great ideas. And before we kind of get into more granular detail on specific, you know, policy issues, thought it might be helpful if one of you would want to volunteer to give like a very quick, like Augusta 101 in terms of the structure of the legislature, you know, the legislature versus the Senate, and how many members there are of each, and just for folks who may not be familiar with just how many folks are there and how it's all set up.
2 chambers, the House and the Senate. There's 35 senators. There are 150 House members. Bills get introduced by what we call the cloture date. And this year that was in early to mid-January. And then they slowly make their way out of what's called the revisor's office. There are nonpartisan staff in the legislature that basically write the laws. So the revisor's office is filled with attorneys who are really good at language, and they're really good at understanding Maine statute and how you might find the fit the puzzle piece of a new piece of legislation in. That then there's you know, all of our committee structures. The committees are topical. You get assigned 1 or 2 committees. And they meet regularly throughout the January to June first year of a 2-year session, and then January to middle of April for the 2nd year of the 2-year session. There is an opportunity to introduce what are called after deadline bills with the permission of the presiding officers, or directly, or going through what's called the legislative council process. So we still do have an opportunity, if we can make an argument that this is a measure that is necessary and worthwhile to be brought forward. So it's the opportunity, the window hasn't closed. That's kind of a rough rough
Yeah,
figure?
so the vast, but I mean, as you can imagine, right, with these number of bills and the way we're structured is it's designed for every bill to get an actual public hearing. And we have true public hearings where anybody from the public can come and show up, and now they can show up on Zoom, which is wonderful, right? But the vast majority of the policy work is done in committees. And if you're not on that policy committee, unless it's something you're specifically very interested in, as a legislator, you're very much relying on the members of that committee to really try to work things out. And the committees, as you can imagine, have a number of Democrats, a number of Republicans. I mean, it's blended. So when something comes out of the Energy and Utilities Committee, like, I don't know anything about that stuff, because it's pretty complicated. So I'll go to Sophie, or a member of that committee to try to understand what's going on. The other thing that is very unique about Maine, actually, is that our committees are joint committees. So they have senators and House members on. Every committee has two chairs, a House chair and a Senate chair. So that when a bill goes through the committee, it's voted on by both the House and the Senate members of that committee. In other states, they do it very differently, where they're separate committees, and a bill can go all the way through the Senate committee, and then at a certain date, it goes back and it starts from scratch over in the House committee. And I mean, I'd like to think, no system is perfect, but the way that we do things really fosters a lot of collaboration and a level of efficiency between the House and the Senate, even though, again, if you're from the outside looking in, it doesn't always look super efficient and smooth. So and then when bills come out of committee they're sometimes come out unanimously in support, unanimously against, but very often they will be amended, and there could be different points of view that are expressed in the committee report, and then they go up and they start, and then it's it's Schoolhouse Rock, how does a bill become a law, 101 from there.
And then I'll just add, the majority of our bills, in my understanding, are often quite bipartisan. And when they leave the committee, they start in the House or the Senate, whoever sponsored the bill. If it was a House member, it starts there. If it's Senate, that starts there. And they kind of can fly through. They're a much quicker process. And so we spend a lot more time on the lesser amount of bills that are often partisan or controversial in different ways. And that's probably more where you can engender a sense that we are consistently at odds, in that we're here kind of fighting it out on the floor. But there is a genuine, quite a large amount of bipartisan or sort of nonpartisan work. And then I feel like I do have to give a shout out to Drew, that there's also the budget committee, and that's kind of a big and often ongoing, months long. There's a lot of public input, discussion, and to get a bill through, it can pass each body, but then has to be considered, or for the most part, has to be considered by that budget committee as to whether it can be funded or not. So you may find that there's quite a few, to Stacey's point, great ideas, but just we don't have the funds to get there, and have to, at different points, make difficult decisions around that. But I would just wanted to also point out that we don't get as much public testimony, at least as I would like. I think I've learned in my brief time there that there's that it's not as easy as you might hope, or we could be making it easier for sure, and to receive that public input, and that you might be surprised just how valued your voice or perspective is if you do give it. I think we really are hungry for that whenever we hear it. So that would be the one final piece I'd offer.
That's great feedback. Thank you, Sophie. Councillor Cushing.
Hi, thanks for coming, all of you. I have a couple of broad issues. You probably heard we're trying to build a school, and schools cost a lot of money. And pretty much we build our schools not with a lot of state help. In fact, I think that we would be called a giver community as opposed to a taker community. And what always strikes me as odd is sort of when you think of an idea that has common sense associated with it, that's when you begin to hear a long litany of reasons why it can't happen. So for example, common sense might say that if we raise the sales tax by half a point, oh my God. And then we took that money and put it in the bank, okay, and let it earn interest. And then we took that fund and used that to capitalize building schools in community. One, we'd get a few folks from away to pay for it. Two, instead of having 50% of the cost of building a school be interest, those funds would be earning interest. Now, you know, when I'm sitting having a drink with somebody, which I frequently do, and after at least two, you know, I'll get on this topic and my God, that makes a lot of sense. Why aren't people doing that? Well, they do it in other states. So my question to you, I'm interested in hearing your myriad of reasons why we don't do that. And then the second issue is that it's about to become summer. And our SEDCO person every year, I guess they have a little thing where they tally up all the sales tax dollars that we sent up to Augusta and how few of them we actually get back. That's fine, I suppose. But the problem is that the people who are generating a lot of that sales tax in the summer are driving on our roads, they're filling up our beaches, they are consuming police, social service resources, and so forth. And we're not in a position where we could get a little piece of that, at least to compensate ourselves, if nothing else, for the inconvenience of having to wait at a traffic light for longer. I'll conclude with this, is that there's a lot of talk up north. People up there hate socialism. But in fact, we every day see wealth redistribution, which is what socialism is by definition. Now, I say that because who knows, maybe somebody's listening and they'll quote me, and at least the discussion will get some traction because I said the S word. Okay, I think that in a community, we are obligated to take care of all of us. But there is a point where that starts to cross a line. And if you read the headlines, not the ones lately, but the ones before these headlines, you would notice in the subtext that there is a property tax revolt beginning to roll across this country because people are getting priced out of their homes. So if you wouldn't mind with that, hopefully not too long soliloquy, I'd love to have you each address those issues.
Can I just add on to that before they respond?
Is this
Because
a friendly amendment?
No, well, it's more to share the conversation that we had at the Chairs in the Circle, which isn't on the legislative agenda, I think, this round. But when we met with all of the chairs to talk about the issue around property taxes and stuff, the one common theme that every community felt strongly about, which really was a big, broad range of communities like ours or others that don't have a lot of businesses, was this notion of having a local option sales tax, where, you know, I think even the consensus in the room at the time, and I don't know if it's gone any further, was, you know, to your point, the communities like ours that would be big contributors like that would be okay with a portion of that going back to the state or the county or whomever to there is some redistribution of it, but also making sure that we get to benefit from that local option sales tax locally. So I don't know where GPCOG is in advancing that, but that was probably the one thing that all of the different municipalities agreed. If that's something that we could get legislation on in the future, that at least gives us that opportunity. Again, there's probably a lot more work to figure out what that is, but it's getting to the same thing you're saying, Don, which is, you know, a little bit of a local option sales tax could, you know, really help us lower property taxes or save up for a school or whatever it is that we want to do in our community, but not having that other revenue stream really makes us rely solely on property tax. And so anything we want to do essentially means we have to increase taxes, and we're just getting to the point, even in a community wealthy like Scarborough, where people just, it's putting people out of their homes. And so again, just being creative about what we can do, I think would be appreciated at the state level. That gives us maybe that opportunity.
Yeah, we can't get any money for capital projects for our schools. And if we could have some relief by a portion of a sales tax that could be dedicated to that purpose alone, I'd be happy with that sort of thing. Because we have why don't we get any money from the state for schools? Because we're a relatively affluent community. Well, that means we've got a lot of businesses. And so a capital, sales tax would make some sense, especially if it's dedicated to things that there's a broad support.
I can start. if
Yeah,
that's helpful. Sure. Totally agree with all of your points. So the two things I'll share is, there are initiatives that are winding their way through the legislature that do include the local option sales tax. The one that I know of that will originate in the Senate is there's a consideration in that bill that would make sure that the money is used to lower property taxes within the town. So that may or may not get to exactly what it is you're hoping for, but I hope you will look at that bill when it comes forward and consider it and offer feedback about how you think it will affect the residents of Scarborough. Then the second thing that I think I'm very excited about, and I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but the governor's task force to look at school funding formula. I mean, we know we have aged infrastructure from Kittery to Fort Kent, and every town is struggling with how to maintain, update, and renew their building and their infrastructure. So there has to be a fix, and it's clear and everybody agrees. I think the place where we're at is just trying to determine what that fix is. So that's always the secret sauce at the legislature is it's often that we can agree on the problem, but we struggle with exactly what the appropriate solution is and how it can be designed so that it works for Scarborough and then it works for shrinking school districts that still have infrastructure that needs maintenance. And they don't have as robust of an economy. So just balancing that and trying to get all the colleagues in both chambers, or at least enough of them, moving in a certain direction is the goal. But the message is clear, and I think we are definitely considering it.
I think I have a certain perspective too, not adding on to everything that Stacey shared for sure, is an understanding I have that our governor in her first run and recommitted in her second run to accept no new taxes. So these pieces are kind of from the beginning of the legislative session are kind of, in my view, kind of stymied. That framing of conversation is stymied. That's my personal perspective. Please, anyone, feel free to fact check me, or if you have a different view, totally accept that. This latest budget that's proposed by the governor is, for the first time in my understanding of her tenure as our governor, and the absolutely great work that she has done, where we may have good faith disagreements, she does have a couple tax considerations that she's proposing. So it's kind of a different posture. So things like the local option sales tax, or ways that you can increase marginally certain types of sales tax or consumption taxes, and how they could be adopted or applied for local education funding, or to supplement or to offset certain property tax considerations, I think might have more room and breadth for being considered and passed now than in any previous session that I've been a part of in now my third term. But I frankly still think there is not a strong change in that sentiment, at least that I hear from my colleagues in the House and Senate, as far as I try to have those discussions. And then I think there's a larger sense, to be frank, in my experience, I sometimes feel it in different votes that I take, that taxes in general can sometimes feel like a difficult conversation to have. Where do they come from? How are we making changes? We've kind of gone through different administrations in the last, 10 plus years. And there's been different big changes and shifts in our tax code. And those are, I think people are of many different minds about it. And I hear a lot from both sides, at least from those that I represent in Scarborough, that, some folks really support it, or it can really depend. Some are really against it, including around local option sales tax, which have inspired some really robust debate, at least in the House. And since being in the legislature, I've learned a lot about the different types of perennial pieces that come up related to the local option sales tax. So I just wanted to be to bring in that perspective, because it's certainly something I feel strongly about, that there are really dire needs and we don't have the resources to meet them, and that property taxes are a very regressive way to achieve certain goals, but they are also quite necessary and produce a very set of sacred and quite important fundamental resources that communities need. And so trying to get at other ways of achieving those things, something like local option sales tax, I think, is an absolutely worthy proposal. I think people might consider it more seriously if there was more input from communities like ours to speak on it in various ways. If it's you personally, or if anyone listening, or you as a council, I think we need a lot more political will and encouragement for us in Augusta to be braver. Maybe I'm not so sure always, what can make the difference, but that's my 2 cents on that.
As usual, Sophie and Stacy, I don't have too much to add, other than, this is an example of why I think this kind of conversation is super helpful, because me knowing, and hearing from local electeds, that this is an important issue to them, I think will frankly make me pay a lot more attention to the debate. I've always been a very open-minded and a supporter of local option sales taxes. Knowing that there's a lot of there's a lot of detail around how they are proposed, and sometimes the bills have limits in how they can be used, or sometimes the bills give the communities a lot of flexibility, of how those could use. So I think those are great debates to have. I often tell people when I'm up there that almost everything I learned about governing, I learned when I was on the Westbrook City Council, right? And sitting where you sit, and I chaired the finance committee for most of my time there. And when like adding half a penny to the mill rate was we would rather die, right? Than do that. And what I carry with me up to Augusta is this belief that of all the taxes that Maine people find distasteful, the sales of the property tax is I understand the debate, but I think a lot of Maine people couldn't tell you how much they spent last year in sales tax, and they might even be able to tell you how much they spent last year in state income tax, or what their marginal rate is. But a lot of people can tell you to the penny what their property tax is this year, what it was last year, how much it went up. So I think we really do limit communities in what they do. To a point that Sophie made earlier, this is an area where showing up and making your voice heard is important. I don't know if this is what she was alluding to, but a lot of us, when we walk into our committee rooms, what we are primarily looking at are professional advocates, lobbyists, right? People who are paid to be there, and they provide a lot of really good information and point of view. But hearing from local people about the impact, and if you ever sit here and debate a bill or an ordinance to do a local sales tax, you're going to hear some of those same things that we're told up there about why this will nobody will shop in Scarborough anymore. They'll all go to South Portland or Portland, or, you'll hear things. And I think, you will consider that as part of your debate. But I think talking about the things you could do with that,
Mhm.
build schools, do property tax relief, maybe you need a fire truck and a amp, right? I mean, I don't know, whatever it is that you decide you need, I mean, that is something that could be a lot more subject to local control if you had some additional options available to you.
John, go ahead. Thank
Yeah,
you.
just switching to another topic related to potential property tax relief. And this was another theme at the GPCOG Chairs in a Circle was, when we were all asked, what's our strategy essentially to help us manage property taxes? A lot of us said growth, which a lot of us also cringed because we know that's a bad word for our communities sometimes when we
Sure.
say growth, but we know it's also this conflicting thing where we have a housing crisis and we need houses for people. And so a lot of us talked about TIFs and how we use TIFs because that's really the only tool we have to try and shield, that growth revenue so that we can use it for other purposes. So maybe one thing that could be explored too is, maybe broadening the TIF statute to allow us to use it even just to fund the operating budgets for our towns when we have it available to us, because again, it's limiting and what we can use those funds for. And even in Scarborough, I think we're getting to the point where it's great that we're doing this, but the qualified uses for what we can use it for are diminishing. But being able to maintain that shielding to help us with, the current funding formulas and everything, I think is helpful. So again, I don't know if there's something there that I think not only would apply to Scarborough, but other communities, at least the ones that GPCOG represents, might be interested in better looking at the TIF statute and broadening maybe the uses. I know there was some stuff I think in there about that. To me, they felt still a little to your point, maybe not enough courage to go as far as we could. Because again, I see that also as a way to incentivize communities to support growth and support housing. A lot of times when we do that, there are costs associated with it. So again, the more we can like shield monies and put them back in our own towns, I think would be helpful. So that's just an idea. One thing to switch gears to a different topic that I'm hoping Senator Brenner, you could talk a little bit about is the legislation that you're sponsoring, and I think all of you have signed up on, for related to the quorum connector. I think it's LD 1020. So I'm hoping you can talk a little about that, because where our council, or at least the last one, was the one that voted to not support the quorum connector. And I saw today in the news that Westbrook Council yesterday pulled away their support. So that seems like it's in your district, but I also know Gorham, is kind of mixed with how they feel about it, rightly so, because I think they stand to benefit a lot from any sort of, traffic improvements in that area more so than the rest of us. So I'm just, if you can talk a little bit about that, and I'm interested to hear the council's perspective on that legislation as well.
I think you've identified where the bulk of the support lies and where the consternation, I guess, if you might call it, exists. And, it's Gorham and towns west of Gorham that really stand to benefit from the MTA's proposed solution. Most of you are probably aware that MTA has backed away from that as a solution and has asked the Department of Transportation to come up with alternatives to a toll highway. So the proposal was driven by advocates and constituents, a very large group of people, which you
Build our house
yep,
too.
you were all are familiar with. And one of their concerns was just about the assets that the MTA picked up during the process of consideration. And so they wanted to make sure there was a way to deal with those land purchases, allow the original landowner to have the opportunity to repurchase that property back from MTA, or have that property go to the town of Gorham and have the town decide what their choice of use for that property would be. And it can include conservation. So that's essentially the proposal in a nutshell. I will say to you that there are many reasons for a bill. This is a quote from a colleague. This is not an original, but sometimes you put bills in to support constituents who want to elevate conversations and make sure that they stay alive. And so this is the beginning, I think, of this conversation of what happens next with the assets for the connector and the idea of the connector and MTA. So I look forward to the debate in the legislature. I look forward to hearing what MTA has to say. It'll be interesting to see who shows up. I'm hopeful we'll see lots of folks from the public for that hearing, but that's essentially where we're at in a nutshell.
Other council comment on the Gorham connector?
Yeah,
Yeah, Bill, go ahead. Thank you.
not to quote Jean Marie, but let me tell you, this is a big deal and it needs a solution. Now, the Gorham connector may not be the solution, but we need to be able to have our representatives and the council work together to advance alternatives that potentially work, because there are other alternatives that could work. But some of these ideas are pie in the sky that I've read in the paper. And so I would like to see us realize this is a high priority issue.
Councilor Cushing, thank you.
I have one point. I heard testimony from a lot of people, very smart people, and one that was compelling for me relates to the word connector. It's basically a conduit where you have little communities out here feeding into the big metropolis. And we all know how that story ends. And what this woman said was, maybe we need to reorient our thinking to quote a phrase that we hear a lot around here, to live, work, play. Now, I grew up in a town where you could live, you could work, and you could play. And a lot of folks might remember those towns. I think I was in one this morning in Saco and Biddeford. And so the notion of, excuse me, can't turn them all off. So the notion of reorienting our thinking to supporting communities with economic development, with housing development, with recreational development, with conservation and sustainability. So if you look west of us now, Buxton is like the next Scarborough, and they're protecting themselves with weird zoning and difficult ways to get there and so forth. So I think that that's probably the most important piece, at least from my perspective. I guess the second thing I just want to say is, early on in our discussion of how things work, there's questions of us going up there and so on and so forth. The only thing any of us can do as a body is get a vote and a resolution. The rest of us, we're just citizens. It's not even, you could say, I'm a Scarborough Town Councilor, and okay, maybe that'll impress somebody, but it comes with no authority outside some vote for this group. So what I would say to this group is that it would be very important for us to do that resolution thing, to pick one or two things and say we are driving a stake in the ground on these issues, and this is what the Scarborough Town Council thinks. My impression is that it made a big difference with the Gorham connector. Whether you agree with the outcome or not, when we passed that resolution, people listened and it mattered.
Yeah, Dawn, I think that's a great point. And I think that speaks to the timeline issue that we brought up right at the beginning, right? We're trying to figure out what our place is in this machine, and with the council turning over in November, we're gaining and losing counselors, with regularity, and the machine just keeps moving forward. And so I think it's really great that this council has prioritized this conversation so that we can start to learn where we fit and really be the most effective. Stacy.
Thank you, Chair Seither. I'll add just one thing, which is Tom Hall. I appreciate and have great empathy for your you and your colleagues receiving all of the complaints about traffic and recognize that you and your cohort in Gorham are extremely eager for solutions. And I can imagine that the challenge of the complexity of transportation solutions falls a lot on your shoulders. And I appreciate that. And I just wanted to acknowledge it.
Thank you. One thing I wanted to go back to was the discussion about TIFs. In terms of getting council alignment on some things that I think, we would like to discuss, that's definitely high on my list as well. Nick, can you give us a little bit of a sense of what you feel about what's being presented and, give us that perspective?
Sure, yeah. Not only as an assessor in Maine, but also as the town's LPC representative, I can say that there are incremental movements towards broadening the uses for TIFs because it is recognized as an economic development tool available to municipalities that many take advantage of, the shelter benefit. So as you know, that shelter benefit means it's not included in the state valuation, so it's not counted against, monies owed to the county or monies we could receive from the state. It's a little more nuanced than that, but that's the gist. So we're getting a lot of funds from those TIF revenues because there's a lot of development in our TIF districts, the downtown TIF district especially. And every year or every couple of year cycle, the legislature does try to add some more uses to that. Most recently, last year, there's one for use of municipal building renovations and whatnot. The one that MMA is putting forward this year is broadening it a bit further for almost any municipal building, as long as it serves some sort of economic development purpose, if you can justify it. So not just the town hall building. And then prior years, the public safety building construction, which we used to pay the debt service on that building next door. Even in conversations as recent as today, we've been discussing how to best utilize TIF funds for the upcoming fiscal year 26 budget. And it's a good problem to have that we are able to utilize these creative strategies to marriage of like the growth in town, which some people like, some don't, but putting it to use for helping people with their tax burden, because that money does mean we get potentially more money from the state or pay less to the county while we still get to use it for all these available uses. Because we're so productive in those districts, though, the worry would be, well, we're going to run out of uses. So on my part, I'm just trying to advocate for more broadening of it, but I'd be open to other creative strategies to change it beyond that. But that's where we're at right now, just broadening the uses. So it's not a narrow focus of what we can use it on, but rather broader and broader. So we get creative control over those monies.
I had a bill to do that in my first term in the legislature and it didn't pass. So I understand, why that would be a great value. And again, I think every legislature, those bills are introduced and debated. And again, it's good to know that there's a strong interest in that here in Scarborough, to be able to use your TIFs in strategic ways to support what your needs are. I'm understanding of the fact that TIFs are one of the only tools that the state gives a local community to encourage economic development or incentivize economic development. So I mean, I think we need to continue to look to make sure that it actually works for communities as communities change and their needs change.
Not to change the subject, but I'm surprised no one had brought up housing more. I know that's some of your interests as well.
I was going to say, we probably have time for one more kind of broad topic. And I know that's something that Councilor Fellows is probably interested in talking about. Do you have specific questions or do you?
Not really
Be a
specific
leader
in
for
terms of
us?
specific policies, but I know a couple of sessions ago, the legislature took a pretty big swing on housing in terms of land use regulation, and there's a lot of tension around local control, which is very understandable, and controlling growth and things like that. But I'm just curious to hear what might be in the pipeline there. I think it's great that Greg Payne, who was formerly at Avesta, is there. He's now been there, I think, a couple of years in the governor's office and has, I think, had a role there. But I'd just be it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on where that might be going.
Can start. I mean, I wasn't in the 130th when, you know, the bill that really impacted the relationship between the state and the municipalities in terms of land use was, you know, debated and passed. Again, I think there are a couple other like very large conceptual bills out there still, you know, around the local planning process. And then they're not specific to affordable housing, but it will impact, you know, decisions around housing. I did serve on the housing committee in the 131st when I came back, when, you know, a lot of our conversation there did talk a lot about the land use issues, but it was also, again, we took a big swing, as you said, in terms of financing, you know, making money available for affordable housing projects, increasing the resources available to main state housing, to do, you know, like tech type funding. You know, unfortunately, those funds are not readily identified right now. I think we put $80 million in over a 2-year period. And, you know, based on what we've been told by planning experts and housing experts, you know, we would ideally be making that kind of investment over the course of many years, right, in order to catch up with the housing stock that we need. But I do think that especially, well, not especially, but I'm focused as you are on in this part of the state where, you know, you want to make sure. I think it's challenging when different communities have different approaches, and then one community might take on, you know, the obligation or take on a lot of projects, knowing that they're more friendly to that than others. And I guess to a certain extent, you know, those decisions can be discussed locally. But I think this is another area like transportation, where, you know, regionalized conversation becomes really important. And I think what you're trying to see up at the state is again, you know, an effort to sort of drive towards that kind of standardization. Not standardization, you know, just regionalization.
From a very novel space, I'll say there's some initiatives that I'm excited to see rise up in that conversation space at the legislature around modular construction, all Maine produced, that would move quickly and be easier in our environment where you can't always be on the ground all months of the year, but you could be building the modular pieces to be delivered when the conditions are right. So and you know, what that does is an initiative like that can unite the forest products industry, the manufacturing industry outside of Scarborough, and then Scarborough's interest and need for housing. So you can unite, you know, multiple constituencies with novel policies like that can move a state forward on housing. And so I'm looking forward to hearing those conversations more broadly in the legislature, seeing where things like that land. But the idea behind that ultimately is you're building your main economy and you're building housing for less money and you're more efficient in the process of doing it. So there are many levers that need to be pulled, I think, on the housing issue. So that's just one novel thing that I think is coming up that I'm excited about.
And I think one thing I don't want to repeat anything that's been said, and I completely agree with you know, what I'm hearing from my colleagues. I feel like I have to bring into the conversation, and I hope it feels relevant with our the type of budget constraints that we're facing in this session. I do have concerns about as we make different shifts, homelessness and housing security, thinking about debates that we've been having in the last few weeks around general assistance funding, for example. So there's a variety of emergency rental assistance and these things, both at the state level and what we'll have the capacity to do, and really difficult decisions that I don't envy our budget committee to be leading on in the coming months and well, days and months, respectively. And also what's happening at the federal level and how different issues around things like energy prices and questions around tariffs and things, and how that all contributes to a landscape of where people are at and if they're able to afford to stay there. Just every time I go out into our community, I feel like there's a sense in different pockets that there are some who are, you know, wealthier and in a certain position, and then you kind of go and you talk to folks and you find there's such diversity in our community of folks who are, you know, got a reverse mortgage or are just barely making ends meet or rationing medication and paying a heating bill. So I hope it feels relevant as well, that that backbone of those that are in a different kind of position, and making sure that they're thought about and protected, which I think I feel a lot of responsibility as well to be a part of, for sure.
Great, thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
of
think
course.
that's a great point. And you know, we talk about things like affordable housing in kind of a broad sense, and there are a lot of different definitions around it, but there also are needs for just very immediate assistance. One of the things I've been struck by since joining the council back in November, and we get the weekly updates from public safety, and it's all public record, anybody could read it, but you see so many calls for service to hotels, things like that involve drug activity. And you know, previous council had to grapple with some tough issues around unhoused,
Yep.
living in motels, and so all that stuff kind of ripples through.
And I just, on that point, I've been so moved and so proud in past years how our town council has tried to be a leader and do the most that they can. And thinking of some of your members who are not here anymore, and John Cloutier, for example, just that amount of care. And there's so many people that, of course, have been part of things, but just trying to do your best and advocate and think about those in our community who be in the same kind of position. I'm really proud. In addition to, there's many trade-offs in relation to growth and smart growth, but I'm sure I don't need to tell you folks that there's a lot of people talking behind our backs in a very positive way about the way that you're trying to lead and the things that you're grappling with. So kudos to you. And I know none of these are easy decisions, but I feel it's really clear that you make us all proud. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Any other final kind of council remarks or questions as we wrap up? We have a very enthusiastic group of singers coming in behind you, which we can hear in the hallway. So if you're wondering why there's such commotion, we have some of our elementary school students joining us this evening. I think you have certainly given us a lot to think about. I think the session was super helpful. And again, I just appreciate you all being here. I know that John and I will put our heads together with leadership and Nick and figure out where we fit and what our piece in the machine is in order to be the most effective, because we want you to know what our priorities are. We are, very deeply connected to our residents. To your point, Stacy, we hear from our residents quite frequently. And so being able to have that open communication with you all so that we can, really serve our residents, that's our universal goal in doing all of this. I'm going to give Shannon just a second here as we wrap up. Shannon, if you want to introduce yourself too, please.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Shannon Lindstrom. I'm the chair of the school board here in Scarborough. And I think you've heard quite a bit from Councilor Cushing and Councilor Anderson about some of the concerns we have, and ours are very specific to schools, of course, and our students and our youngest community members. We too are very interested in forging a relationship, a little bit more involved in providing our perspective on bills that are up for consideration as they relate to schools. There are quite a few right now that are of concern to us and top of mind. Then there's also some issues that are not in bills that are top of mind and of concern to us. The school building is the biggest. Preschool is the second one that we're trying to contend with. And at the same time, trying to be thoughtful and responsible with our citizens' finances. As you mentioned, they can tell you down to the penny what they spend, which is absolutely true in property taxes. And at the same time, we as a school board, we are receiving about 11% of our budget comes from the state. So most of the money we're receiving, we're asking for from the citizens who are struggling to make ends meet. And so it's a tricky balance, but I would love to have you come to one of our meetings. I was trying to think through if it works best that we do a joint process, but I don't know if it would work best if we separate it out and do it separately. We can talk about that later, but maybe something to keep in mind. Because we are also very interested in forging a relationship. And I would also invite you to, if you are interested to see the state of our schools, we would love to provide tours so that you can see what exactly our building committee that is made up of residents in the neighborhood. Counselor Seither and Counselor Donovan sit on it as well. But everybody else are volunteers. You have one right back here that sits on it. They're all community members and they're trying to come forward with a thoughtful solution to some very, very real problems in our community. And so I would love to show you around if you're interested.
Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close our workshop. The regular business meeting will begin at 7 p.m. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Good evening and welcome. This is the meeting of the Scarborough Town Council. Today is Wednesday, March 19th, 2025. And if you could please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kristen, could you please call the roll?
Counselor Doherty,
Here.
Counselor Cushing,
Here.
Counselor Shoup,
Here.
Counselor Fellows,
Here.
Counselor Donovan,
Here.
Counselor Anderson,
Here.
Council Chair Seither.
Here. Thank you very much. In light of our very special guest this evening, I'm going to go and do something a little unorthodox and request that we move Proclamation 25-001 and have that be our next order of business. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Is all those in favor? Great. So with that, I will turn over the introduction of our guest to Counselor Anderson.
Great. Well, thank you so much for everybody for being here tonight. So a couple weeks ago at the 125th celebration of our library, I had the pleasure of hearing the Wentworth Choir perform We Go for Scarborough. And it was such a great song. So this was written nearly 60 years ago in 1958 by John Redmond during our 300-year celebration. And while things have certainly changed in Scarborough since 1958 and will likely continue to change in the next 60 years, many aspects of the song for me will stand the test of time. And so there are things in here that make me proud to be a Scarborough resident. It describes us as a grand old town, the best little town around. But most importantly, it talks about our people. It says, our people in Scarborough are friendly as can be, who are good and true, and can't do enough for you. They meet you and treat you great. I know there's a lot of things going on right now in our community or around the world that are overwhelming to many of us, but I think the one thing that hopefully all of us in the room tonight can agree is that we have such a great group of people in our community who represent great values of our town, of the state, and of our country. And so I thought it would be great to bring this forward, hear from our Wentworth Choir, hear the song and make it the official song of Scarborough. We are, I think, a really strong, vibrant community, and our history is super, super important to us. And so when this song was found by Rodney Lofton, who had shared it with Elsa Rowe at the library, I just think it's really important that we honor our history, but also look forward and celebrate the great things about our community. So without further ado, I would like to bring up Kristen.
Hold on.
Oh,
Sorry, John.
Yep.
I'm going to go ahead and just procedurally, I'm going to go ahead and read
Yep.
the resolution. So we have a prepared resolution and then the council will vote to accept the resolution and then we'll have our
Yep.
guests come up front. Okay. All right. So with that, Proclamation 25-001, recognition of the presentation of the Scarborough song, We Go for Scarborough. Be it resolved by the Town Council of the Town of Scarborough, Maine, in Town Council assembled, that whereas the Wentworth Choir performed a song entitled We Go for Scarborough at the library's 125th year celebration, and whereas the song was written in 1958 in celebration of the town's 300th birthday by composer John Redmond, and whereas Mr. Redmond from Clinton, Massachusetts, was a frequent summer resident of Scarborough in the Pine Point area, the memory of Pine Point Beach inspired another song several years prior entitled A Girl, a Fella, a Beach Umbrella. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Town Council thanks the members of the Scarborough Wentworth Choir and their teacher for bringing this song back to life. Now, be it further resolved that the Town Council in the Town Council assembled does hereby adopt We Go for Scarborough as the official town song. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you very much. At this time, I would love for our Wentworth School singers to please join us up front. Council members, I ask that you please join the audience so that we can listen to our singers.
And as they come down, I just want to recognize Kristen Goodall for
Yes.
organizing tonight and for leading the choir.
Thank you so much. And as you guys, yes, certainly. So if we can have everyone kind of come up and line the front, and then when you're finished, we have a couple of little gifts for our singers this evening.
They found in a sound. Let's go have some discover from the pride of the pine tree state. Look at yourself. I see myself. Wait, I'm right there. What? That I didn't get a picture yet. What is that?
Yeah. And then they can watch town meetings. That was it. Just like a game.
And thank you to all of the grown-ups who brought the kids to share this evening with us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting too, if you want.
Yeah, don't.
That was absolutely magical. Thank you, Counselor Anderson, so much for bringing that into our chamber this evening. Item number 4 on our agenda is general public comment. If there are any members of the public wishing to make general public comment, please approach the podium now. Welcome. Please state your name and address for the public record.
Not my first time. My name's Dave Green. I live at 135 Beach Ridge Road. And I was here June 8th, 2022, and talked about the subject that I'm going to speak on tonight. And that is the polluted parking lot down the co-op. Thank you, because Community Services and Mr. Hall couldn't make sure there was a porta potty down there. Again, because this happened back in June 2022. You want to put 50 clam diggers out of work because the Jones Creek is right there. You ought to be ashamed. What is the problem here? You can't get a porta potty down there. You got a marine resource officer sitting right there looking at it all. It's disgusting. It's totally disgusting. And you got a restaurant's going to open down there. I wouldn't go near the place. And I wouldn't go down to Jones Creek and dig any clams either. And I hope none of you will eat any, because it's filthy. People are going behind your restroom down there that you closed down last fall. Shut the water off because it'll freeze. I understand that. But at the same time, you should have brought a porta potty down there. What is the issue, Mr. Hall? What is the issue? That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Anyone else wishing to make public comment this evening? Welcome.
I don't have anything super specific, so I'll try to keep it short. But I don't get the chance to come in person that often anymore because I just had a baby 3 weeks ago. And
Matt, can you introduce yourself?
oh, thank you. Sorry, a little sleep deprived. My name is Matthew Keith. Many may know me as Matthew Stuckey, but I had a name change about a month ago. I live at 8 Pleasant Ave. And I was just like really, I loved the pre-meeting thing with the legislators. Amazing. And I love that you guys thought to make that happen and that there's this effort to collaborate more. And I just appreciate all of them and all of you so much. And thank you for the work that you all do. That's all.
Thank you, Matthew. Anyone else wishing to make general public comment this evening? Seeing none, I will go ahead and close general public comment. Item 5 is the minutes from our March 5th, 2025 Town Council meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? I will say, Counselor Cushing had asked for there to be a slight adjustment to the minutes to include a reference to discussion that he had for his withdrawn motion on the topic of the LI conversation. Tody took care of his adjustment and it's part of the meeting minutes as presented. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor? Show that as unanimous. Thank you. Item 7 is treasurer's warrants. I will make sure I take care of those before the end of the evening. Item 8 is town manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps I'll speak to the question just raised at the podium. It's certainly true. We did have an oversight. Typically, we do in the off-season provide a porta potty at certainly the beach areas that are frequented. Pine Point Beach is, the co-op is certainly one of those. Once that came to our attention, we've remedied that. I'm not aware that there's any particular health concern or water quality concern as a result of that, so I apologize. It was an oversight and we'll do. Not in this form, no. I'm located right here. You're welcome to come see me anytime, any day. With regard to budget presentation, this is certainly the time of year where we're deep in that process. In fact, I'm scheduled to provide a presentation in coordination with the superintendent a week from tonight on the 26th. We're making final adjustments. The budget book itself will be taking a bit of a different shape this year. We've received a lot of input from counselors and even internally with staff. I've been able to leverage some skills on staff, and I think you'll be pleased. We think this document will serve a number of purposes and really provide a good overview and a deep dive, if you wish, to understand all the intricacies of our budget, both town and school. With respect to Eastern Trail, I'm very pleased to say that yesterday we received the final approval from the Federal Highway Administration. That was the final piece we're waiting for. We are on schedule to advertise that project for bids March 24th, and bid opening will be on April 17th. For efficiency and ease, we're going to line that up with the Black Point Road reconstruction project, similar timeline with bid opening for April 17th. So very pleased we're finally getting moving on both these projects. Members of the council and the public may be aware of an incident at Wentworth School back on March 6th. For our purposes, we classify that incident as a mass casualty incident. The name is a bit, doesn't suggest the actual event, but nonetheless, I believe we transported a total of 11 individuals, 10 students and 1 teacher. And really by definition of the number of reported injuries and transports to the hospital for treatment really defines that as a so-called mass casualty. Very pleased with our response. I think in total we had 11 different agencies respond to us. It really was a great demonstration of how mutual aid systems are essential and how they work almost seamlessly. Within a total of 37 minutes, all of those individuals were transported from this campus and at least en route, if not had already arrived at the hospital. Very pleased to report that there were no injuries. In fact, I think most were cleared within the hour of being checked out at the hospital, but nonetheless, we obviously take those situations very, very seriously. It's also a great opportunity for us to kind of look within. There was an after-action discussion today that involved probably 20 different folks, both town and school alike. I was not part of that, but I know that those are very useful exercises to provide sometimes critical feedback. That's what we need to hear. Are there things we need to do better? I think this was a shining example, and again, thankfully, it didn't amount to much, but very pleased with how the town and the school really responded. I do want to report on a couple of final things. The council is aware sometime back, forgive me, I don't know the exact dates, but the council denied a license for a cannabis establishment. That establishment was called Shark Tank or Platinum Smoke. That entity appealed that decision to Superior Court. The town was victorious in that effort, or at least victorious in that we defended and were successful, that the council took appropriate action in that instance. To date, we spent $5,782 in legal costs to defend that case. And we just received notice last week that the appellant is appealing that to the law court. And so we will continue to provide a defense of the council's action taken, and I'll continue to keep you abreast of that matter as it moves forward. I do expect this will be a bit longer in process. The law court tends not to be as swift in their hearing and of cases, but as I get better information, I'll certainly provide that to you. Lastly, I just want to make you aware, this is an issue that you'll see come through. It's part of the detail of the budget. Some councilors may be aware, we've had a really strong tradition of sharing services with other communities. We share Harbor Master with Cape Elizabeth. We provide vehicle maintenance services for 5 different communities. And we also share our animal control officer with the city of Westbrook, and that has been in place for at least 5 years or so. Very pleased we have a new animal control officer, relatively new within the last year and a half. We really see the value that she brings to us, and frankly, the call volume and the sort of activity, particularly on our beaches in the summer, and are going to be kind of pulling that back and having her full-time back in Scarborough. Very pleased with that. This is done through an interlocal agreement, and we've initiated the process with Westbrook. Our timing was fortuitous. In fact, I think they see some opportunity for them to go in a different direction as well. So no hard feelings, and very pleased to have our animal control officer back and have her 100% of the time. So with that, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Tom. Any questions for Tom? Yeah, Counselor Anderson.
No questions, just a comment. We saw a coyote in our neighborhood today, and my wife got freaked out and called the animal control officer, and she did a great job with my wife. So just wanted to give a shout out to the animal control officer.
Thanks for sharing.
Counselor Cushing.
Yes, Tom, I was down at the Bird Park Beach reconnoitering my walking territory. And I noticed that we have these pretty fancy gates. We have all the electricity. And can you explain, as you know, I think we should just be able to scan a card and so forth. Can you explain what those gates do, how they're operated, and how they might fit into a bigger picture of parking control at the beach?
Yes, it is certainly a step in the direction of an automated system. There's no question. We see in the near term that it will provide value to us for regulating parking in off hours within the facility. And so in their wisdom, past council approved this, and clearly it is a step toward an automated system. There's no question about that. We've had some experience. We have a similar system at Higgins Beach, and it works quite well, really managing those evening or nighttime hours.
Other questions for Tom? Yeah, Counselor Doherty. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just curious about the school incident. You didn't say, did they ever come up with a conclusion of what was the cause?
We did all the testing. There was certainly no carbon dioxide or monoxide. There was, there were no results. I think it was as simple as a bit of a psychosomatic event. I think generally most of us are feeling not at our best this time of year. One student, I think, came close to or may have fainted. And I think that has an effect of other people seeing that happen and feeling similarly. And really, it's not an overabundance of caution. I don't doubt that these students felt ill in the time, but there was no precipitating factor. So very pleased to have taken the time even to transport them to the hospital to make certain that there was no lasting effect.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Counselor Anderson?
Yeah, I just want to commend the town and the school for their partnership. I had the pleasure in one council going to the emergency department or district emergency wide group that discusses how to handle these types of situations. So just to see how everything came together very smoothly for our students, our staff, our families, I think was just very commendable. And seeing the communication from school department, the fire department, the police department, I think it was just, these things are very scary, but it was just handled, I think, with extreme, like grace and discipline. And I'm very proud to have seen that play out. The situation was scary, but, I'm proud of the fact that our departments were all able to work very well together.
Great. With that, I apologize. I skipped item 6, which is adjustments to the agenda. At this point, I'm just going to leave the agenda as is, and I look forward to rules and policy getting us straight so that I don't have to adjust the agenda every meeting. But I will, at this point, just move through on to order number 25-020, 7 p.m. public hearing and second reading on the proposed amendment to Chapter 405, the Town of Scarborough zoning ordinance regarding the light industrial district. And this is coming to us from our planning department. Welcome, Autumn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At our first reading, we presented a draft that had gone from Long Range Planning Committee and the Ordinance Committee. We did have our public hearing at Planning Board Monday night, and I forwarded you their recommendations and a memo outlining those. Excuse me. They essentially took out what I thought was a great idea for Mini Warehouse, and they also struck the hours of operation performance standard. They left the other 4 performance standards as is. And then they reiterated the need for a retroactive clause. So this would only apply to uses moving forward for those additional performance standards. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Does anyone have specific questions for Autumn? Thank you very much. At this point, I will open this item for public comment. Anyone wishing to make public comment, please approach the podium or raise your hand online. And while we greet our guests at the podium, I will say that Mrs. Hamilton did submit written testimony to be entered into the public record, and the full council had access to that prior to the meeting.
Hi, good evening. My name is Greg Braun. I'm an attorney at Berg and Parkinson. I've been here once before on this issue, and I'm here representing Daniel Dickinson and his entities 121 and 151 Two Rod Road LLC, which own real estate and operate businesses in the light industrial district. I'd like to just reiterate or restate for the record that we are generally in opposition to the proposed amendments. I've previously submitted written bases for those objections on February 28th and then March 6th. And I know Mr. Dickinson also spoke before the planning board this past Monday. That being said, to the extent that this council does desire or determine that adopting some proposals is appropriate, we would ask that you accept the planning board members' proposals and recommendations. Specifically, the one that would ask or suggest that you strike the limitation on hours of operation. Not to fully recap their meeting, but I will point out what I thought were several good points that were raised by different members of that board. The first was that a nighttime ban is unreasonable because many industrial businesses require 24-hour on-site employees, services, and there's frequently opportunities or instances where employees need to travel to and from their facilities outside of what would be otherwise considered normal business hours. The breadth of the ban in hours would be unreasonable because it's would likely limit a business's abilities to make necessary repairs, maintenance, or take other necessary actions during off hours, because this ban would not just provide a limit on the time frame for the uses, but also, as written, all ancillary and accessory uses of the property. One planning board member pointed out, I thought very reasonably, that more likely than not, a broad 24 or a broad time ban would have unintended consequences because it's just sort of impossible to know exactly what sort of certain projects or developments are going to come before them in the future. And then another good point I thought worth restating for the council here tonight was a planning board member pointed out that by limiting the hours of business in the light industrial district, you might in fact be in turn increasing the density or amount of traffic in the high use hours. Whereas if you were to allow for use of the light industrial district during a 24-hour period, that traffic for those businesses and purposes would be spread out over a larger period of time. I've also previously indicated that there are any number of uses that do in fact require 24-hour activity and presence on the properties. I won't reiterate those. But I would just ask or suggest too that finally, if the council were to impose that restriction as it relates to time, you may also be imposing upon the town staff a burden and duty to try to enforce that restriction that they might find difficult to do. And so that's it. I would ask the council to please accept the planning board proposals as they've made them. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, Mrs. Hamilton is online. Welcome, Mrs. Hamilton.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Denise Hamilton, Two Rod Road. I will just read into record what I wrote, and I do ask for accommodations. I don't think I will go over 3 minutes, but it may be over a little bit depending on how quickly I can talk. As most of you know, I've had discussions with town staff going back to September of 2021 with Autumn and Helen's predecessors. I've attended all meetings from long range planning to town council and anything in between, fighting for our neighborhood. I've spent countless hours consulting with lawyers, researching, reading, and dissecting the ordinance and performance standards, and have brought before the town over the years contradictions and inconsistencies with the ordinance, which led to the long-range planning meeting in October of 22. I'm concerned that the long-range planning was not given accurate information at that time, which could have had potential changes made much sooner. I was in attendance to that meeting, and when the 2 lots on Two Rod Road were being discussed, long-range planning asked the question, can anything be done with those lots under the current ordinance? And the answer was only under the RFO. that the lots were landlocked for LI use. If they were told at that time, and it was not known at that time that Dan Dickinson bought the lots 3 months earlier per town records, until I did some digging and advised Autumn that he could use the lots as LI if he could gain access by a lot that has Holmes Road frontage. They may have acted on our requests for change at that time, but in my opinion, they looked at it as no harm, no foul, since nothing could be done, so we thought. This ordinance was established going against the recommendations of long-range planning and the comprehensive plan, and not written to protect the residential neighborhood. Again, homework was not done by the landowner, as he was not aware about the loophole of gaining access via lot with Holmes Road frontage until about 10 to 11 months ago. I attended the planning board meeting Monday night, and it's very much apparent that this advisory board is pro-developer and not pro-resident, and should strongly be looked at when you've got the only LI district in a residential neighborhood. Just because the town ran out of industrial space doesn't make it right to throw one in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. There need to be very tight standards with black and white rules, so there's no question of what is or is not allowed and when. The planning board is allowed to negotiate what they can get for the town without a care in the world for the people who are affected by their decisions. They had every right to put a condition of hours on the FedEx project and decided to use their power and the fact that performance standards are so subjective to push it to the limit, with the exception of James Hebert, and cause adverse effects for the people who have lived here for 10 to 65 years. There needs to be hours of operation put on this ordinance, and if it means removing wholesale distribution and trucking terminals as recommended by the Long Range Planning Committee, and please listen to the ordinance meeting at 7 minutes last month, then so be it. Putting additional buffers or truck bays on the opposite side of the property is not going to reduce the noise of tractor trailers and backup alarms. Remember, if the Two Rod Road lots gain access through the FedEx property, that road is going to be right behind our backyards through the wetlands. We can hear tractor trailers on the turnpike from our backyard, and this would obviously be closer. Not to mention with the trucks, with the FedEx facility is going to be even louder should Dan Dickinson decide to put a trucking terminal of some sort. These alleged noise studies done by the FedEx developer are great. However, it's not reality within a residential neighborhood. Did they do any on-site studies and tests and ask the neighbors for their input? No. You can better believe that if we're hearing backup alarms late at night, we all will be calling police, filing complaints, because based on performance standards under M.1.2, the use will not create any offensive noise or vibration to abutting landowners. That would be a violation of the ordinance when it's disrupting our sleep and our quality of life. I also support removing all cannabis types of businesses. Regardless of the new rules in place for cannabis operations, it's already causing problems with who's at fault when there are odor complaints and where is it really coming from. We can't get police presence in our neighborhood to slow down traffic, so it's hard to believe we'll get police here for odor complaints. These are not needed and should be stricken, including the testing lab, even though long-range planning has recommended leaving it. If it's that difficult to establish a testing lab, then it's not important to potentially allow someone to put one in our neighborhood, causing even more adverse effect on our land values. And back when the cannabis was being discussed pre-COVID, I attended all those meetings, and they were saying that cannabis operations would not be allowed west of the turnpike, yet somehow that made it into our ordinance as well. Please, we, the residents of our neighborhood, are asking you to protect us and not add insult to injury by allowing more disruptions to our lives, safety, more traffic, and negative effect on our land values. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hamilton. Anyone else wishing to make public comment this evening? Seeing none, I will go ahead and close public comment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Council discussion. Councilor Cushing.
A procedural question.
Yes, sir.
Do we need a motion to accept the planning board recommendations?
No. Yes? Yes,
Yes.
we do as an amendment. Yes,
So would it be appropriate for me at this time to make such a motion?
certainly.
Good. I am motioning that we accept the good and hard work of the planning board and amend the ordinance to reflect their changes. Thank you.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, discussion on the amendment?
So this is to amend the ordinance, I almost said complaint, the ordinance, with the specific recommendations from the planning board. I would not support this, and I wanted to speak to kind of the planning board meeting and that, and I don't know if this amendment at this time is probably the perfect time to do that. Because I did watch the planning board meeting, and I appreciate the conversation. I would say that generally, I felt like their conversation was based around the idea of potential people coming to this area to use it, where I understand that's the planning board's job. That's, I mean, as a counselor, I was like, okay, not once did they think of, there was one planning board member who was actually putting in consideration the residents who were there. So I think generally, while I appreciate the conversation the planning board had and their feedback, I don't think there was a real consideration for the residents who were there first. Some of the comments that I heard during the planning board were also that my understanding, one of the planning board members said that, well, the residents were there first, actually, and they were there first. The light industrial zone was created after residents had already been living there and had been a residential zone. And so I think that's why, you know, you see the recommendations that we have is because we are elected to represent the residents of Scarborough, and the residents of Scarborough are not able to reside, you know, quietly in their neighborhood now with FedEx. I will speak more to this ordinance, but I think when it comes to the planning board recommendations, I don't support, you know, I think striking the hours basically, and that's why I won't support this. And I'm happy to speak to the hours more, I guess, because I know John has an amendment to the hours. But if this is what the motion is, I do not support it.
Thank you, Karen. Counselor Anderson,
Procedurally, like if we wanted to split the planning board
recommendations?
recommendations and only include the first two to act on and pull out the hours, how would we do that?
I think you could make a motion to procedurally split the planning board's recommendation to separate the recommendation regarding hours, to take that on as a separate consideration. Is that the only recommendation of the planning board that you would like to take as a separate consideration at this time?
I'm happy to take them one by one. I'm looking at Counselor Shu.
There's a problem though, because the number 2 says performance standards 1 through 4, and we want to keep performance standard number 5.
Admittedly, I have been trying to keep my computer
So they want to
not
remove
up,
the mini
but I'm gonna have to pull
warehouse,
up the ordinance.
remove the mini warehouse at an effective date, which we need an effective date, but they're saying to performance standards 1 through 4, and I'm saying I want standards 1 through 5 to remain. And then the third one is remove performance standard number 5 pertaining to hours. So I'm more, I don't know.
So perhaps it's better to accept the planning board recommendations as written and take that on as a motion. And then we could make amendments to the main motion, which now would include the planning board recommendations. Does that make sense? Okay, let's handle it procedurally that way then. Okay. No, Counselor Shu?
But if I don't support the plan board recommendations, I'm not supporting this.
Correct.
Okay.
Are there other considerations for Counselor Cushing's amendment to accept the planning board recommendations? Seeing, oh, that's what this is. Yes,
I have a little discussion.
sure, certainly. Specifically to the planning board.
Yeah.
Okay,
So my history with this is brief. Doesn't go back to when the Speedway was here, although I did take my first wife on my first date at the Beechford Speedway. Little trivia to lighten the mood. But, you know, I think that when at least I got in, I think that, is this thing on? It is? You can't hear me in the back? How about now? We good? I don't want you to miss a word of this. Okay. But, you know, Councilor Anderson and I got involved in this to hopefully resolve a dispute between neighbors. And our goal was to try to find some middle ground. And we moved through, I think, a process with this council where we said, well, let's get some performance standards. I think in my estimation, I've seen Mr. Dickinson make a lot of movement with a lot of stuff he doesn't like, and we're now down to hours of operation. That we then send this to our planning board. And one of the things that I hear in this body over and over again is that we must rely. I'm not saying we rubber stamp, but we should have a really good reason to override the thoughtful people who serve as volunteers on our committee, whether it be the Community Service Committee, or whether it be the Transportation Committee or the Ordinance Committee. This has been through a bunch of committees. It's had a lot of work, and we're now at a point where we have a compromise that comes from the planning board with decent justification, which says, looking forward, we don't think this hours of operation thing is a good idea because of its potential unintended consequences, and for the fact that there are some organizations, for example, in my world, medical billing, well, you can do that in the middle of the night. Sometimes you still drive to work. So you can have all kinds of transaction processing businesses, clean, which can operate 24/7 in a 24/7 world. You could do reading x-rays 24/7. And so the notion that we could somehow monkey with this and come up with some middle ground makes absolutely no sense to me. What we are doing here truly is trying to lock the barn door after the horse is left. The problem here is that the FedEx terminal is operating a 24/7 trucking organization with backup buzzers, and the neighbors don't like it. Now, when I say the neighbors don't like it, I've seen one neighbor primarily. I didn't see any other neighbors signing this letter. We saw 3 neighbors at the meeting that John and I had. There are a lot of houses down there. So when I hear the neighbors don't like this, I can count 3, 2 of which showed up at a meeting, which I felt was productive after everybody got calmed down, and 1 person who has been on this apparently since the beginning of time. And so, you know, at some point here, this council needs to think about the long-term nature of the decisions we make and the fact that individuals like Mr. Dickinson rely on those decisions. We just had another discussion 2 weeks ago, and you know I opposed that with respect to the wetlands, where we honored the planning board's desire not to get involved in the interpreting what the science might say about a better alternative to wetlands. So we said, that's good. Well, we did that probably because it fit with the agenda. So if this council is going to be consistent and fair, they need to adopt the planning board recommendations. And I'll make one final point, and that is that the same planning board recommendations, I think the first 4 are cuckoo. The first one says that the planning board is going to be the arbiter of what smells. The next one, it says they're going to be the arbiter of what's too loud. And the next one says what's too bright. That makes no sense to me, okay? But this is a compromise. So again, you can go back in there, and if you listen to the planning board meeting, which I did, you will learn that these performance standards are an overlay to performance standards that already exist on many of the other uses. Now, in my view, it would make more sense to go back and put the appropriate performance standards for the appropriate uses. But instead, we're just going to pop this blanket thing on top of it. But that, to me, is a compromise that gets us from point A to point B in a way that does what I think we were supposed to do, is use our judgment, our common sense with respect to fairness, and set our agendas and our sympathies for one side of this or the other aside. Thank you.
Thank you. Other counselor comments on the amendment? Counselor Fellows and then Counselor Anderson. Thank you.
So I support the planning board amendment. I do appreciate the sentiment around, putting residents first. I will point out that when we talk about Scarborough residents, that also does include Mr. Dickinson and others who want to do business in town. And I know sometimes there's a tension and there's discussion about whether this or that board or committee or the council is quote unquote overly developer friendly. But I think, we represent all of Scarborough. That includes economic activity. And I think we, to Councillor Cushing's comments, I think this is a compromise. I was at the planning board meeting on Monday night, and I granted, I'll freely admit, I'll freely disclose, I definitely have some planning board DNA, and so I give them the benefit of the doubt, and based on their body of work and knowing the sorts of people who serve on that board, they do weigh the concerns of existing residents. The performance standards, this overlay of performance standards, I believe, speaks to that. And one of the comments that was cited during public comment on this about the potential of sort of actually concentrating traffic during peak hours was directly related to resident impacts. So it's not perfect. I'm relatively new to this council. I'm relatively new to this iteration of this issue. But it feels to me like at the end of the day, it is a dispute between neighbors, and I feel like it's time to put it to bed, and I think this is a reasonable compromise. Thank you.
So I support the first two items. I do think removing the added use that Autumn had suggested, I think it's fine to remove that. And I do think we need to set an effective date. I think that makes sense. I do think when it was originally brought to us to have those hours apply to all uses, I thought that was a stretch too far. I didn't think it made sense for all the reasons that were suggested and discussed at the planning board, that applying a peanut butter hours where there are really good uses to be operating 24 hours. I know that there's been a lot more public involvement and engagement in this, and I think unfortunately for the residents, they've gotten fatigued because they feel like we're not listening. So when I met with them in the garage at Miss Hamilton's, where I was with 10 different residents who live there, that was the message, was we're fed up and we don't feel like we're being listened to. We go to the planning board meetings, we're given 3 minutes. We don't feel like we're being heard. And that's what really motivated me to kind of bring this back to council, is that, to show our residents that, look, when you have an issue, we will listen, we will evaluate, and we will make decisions. We'll work through our process. This one in particular has been quite a zigzag, because every stakeholder group that we've engaged with, be it the landowners like Mr. Dickinson, Miss Hamilton and all of her neighbors that I met with in the garage that August day, our long range planning committee and our planning board, have all kind of had slightly different perspectives. And so all of those are valid, all of those matter. And I think we got to take in all of those pieces of feedback. But for me, the piece that continues to be the issue that, again, I heard from the neighbors, and it really, as Councilor Cushing said, really started with FedEx, this concern of trucking facilities, and the proliferation of 24/7 trucking facilities, I think, was their big concern. So I would like to see us amend the Performance Standard 5, which was also brought up in the planning board discussion yesterday, that we limit it to trucking facilities for the hours, but still give the planning board the opportunity to waive that in the event that there's a use that makes sense, because there are parts of the LI district where a 24/7 facility for trucking might work, that, you know, the one off of Holmes Road closer to the highway, like that, those are areas that in the future could be redeveloped. And I don't think that should be an issue that the planning board couldn't, you know, discuss, but at least this gives them that option. And I think, you know, sometimes when we have these ordinances and these things like Counselor Cushing said that are so broad, you know, it can go one or two ways. Either they can really leverage that broadness to like really get things as specific as they need, which I think they were able to do that with FedEx if you watched all and how hard they used it. Or it could be, well, we're not going to do anything. And so for me, you know, doing something with the hours specific to trucking facilities just gives them a little bit more structure to work within. So I don't know how to vote on this because I support 2, but I don't support the 3rd. So I'm fine to move it forward as long as we can come back and potentially amend and discuss the hours piece a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, and I think procedurally that's the intent, so. Other new,
Just for clarification.
Counselor Cushing, please, I'm,
Sorry.
that's okay. I really want to stay focused on discussion of the amendment. If you have something to say on the amendment. Thank you.
Yes, I perhaps want to repeat this notion that this body needs to get clear on what we think the responsibilities of the planning board are. So on the one hand, we hear from the planning board that they don't want to make a call other than a 25-foot setback on wetlands. Fine, we honor it. But can you have it both ways? And you look over here and the next thing you know, it's like, okay, well, now we have all of this broad authority. And then it appears that what this body is going to do is we're going to sort that out for them, okay? We're going to say, well, we'll narrow your scope here, we'll bring your scope, you know, we'll widen it up here. And, you know, when I hear Autumn come up here and explain technical stuff like, you know, how high the curb needs to be, where this cut is, and so on and so forth. There is a huge amount of detail and expertise among the people who sit on that board. And they were happy with the 4 out of 5 of these elements. And so I get that the neighbors have a problem. Their problem should have been addressed when the FedEx terminal went in. And the real issue here, and we get into this thing, is we're not going to solve any problem. Okay, we're going to limit things going forward, productive, constructive uses. But the FedEx terminal was the mistake. And we can't correct that mistake, and we should not be balancing the books on the future uses in that zone. It's the last one left. And one of the concerns I have is that we are sort of backdooring growth, environment, and some of these other things by basically narrowing in on commercial development. That strikes me as a little dangerous. That's another matter. So my point simply is this is about listening to and supporting the recommendations of the committees, right? We just did that last week with the parking people. We said they worked hard on it and they put forth this stuff and we all voted for it because we think the committee did a good job. So are we suggesting that the planning board has, I was going to use a colloquial term, not done quite as good a job this time? You tell me. That's it.
With that, if there's no other additional comments on the amendment, I'm going to go ahead and call the vote on the amendment. All those in favor of amending the main motion with the planning board recommendations? All those opposed? Thank you. I show that as 6-1. Returning to the main motion as amended. John?
Yeah, so I would like to amend the main motion to add a performance standard specifically to warehouse facilities, distribution, wholesale trade and transportation and truck terminals. So that's one use where they shall be limited to operating hours between 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. for each day of the week unless otherwise approved by the planning board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
So again, oh, sorry.
Yeah,
can I-
thank you, Counselor Anderson.
So again, the intent here is really, again, this all goes back to the meeting that Counselor Cushing and I had that he had mentioned where, again, when we kind of really dug in to say, well, like, what's your biggest concern? And it really came down to 24/7 service and the trucking terminals in specific, because the issue that we can't manage or control is the beeping noises that happen, because that's a OSHA requirement is my understanding. And so people were very concerned about that, especially when they found out it was 24/7. So I have a slight different opinion from what Counselor Cushing just said about, our role as it relates to past mistakes. I view you learn from your mistakes, you adapt and you make changes. That's why we're here. That's why we look at laws, look at our zoning. It always changes and evolves. And I agree, stability is key, but also fine tuning and making sure that it's a little bit tighter based on lessons learned, I think is also super important. This isn't, intended to diminish our planning board by offering something different. Just like last week when we offered multiple amendments to the beach fees that our rec advisory board worked on, wasn't as a means to diminish the great work that those committees do. This is about the lens that we see, or at least that I see from all the stakeholders that I've met with through this process. And I feel like in the spirit of trying to make the best for everyone, this is, in my opinion, a little bit better than just removing the hours completely. And so I won't have any hard feelings if this doesn't pass either. Again, for me, this is like, because I feel like when I'm here, the residents in my mind, who I met with, who I talked with, who I promised to kind of bring these things forward, this is something that I felt that, hopefully, even though they're not getting everything that they want, just like Mr. Dickinson isn't getting everything that he wants, just like our long-range planning committee isn't getting everything that they recommended and planning board may not get, I feel like this is something good for the residents.
Thanks, John. Counselor Shu? Thank you. You're welcome.
So I want to comment because in regards to FedEx, I think one of the misconceptions that happened was, they went through half the process and then kind of just slightly revealed that they were going to be 24/7. So I feel like we were all, I was part of the planning board and the council when that was playing out. I think some people were kind of blindsided by the idea that, okay, fine, FedEx is coming next to us. Denise was showing up at the meetings, and then it was this reveal of like, wait a minute, they're going to be 24/7. And I think that's when we kind of stepped up and said, this is a situation that we really need to deal with. And so I'm going to continue to support some sort of hours. I think this is in regards to simply protecting the residents. I don't think, FedEx is there. There's nothing we can do about it. Spreading the problem, I don't think is a solution. Saying, oh, it's too late, I don't think is a solution at all. There's no control that they have over the beeping. People are going to have lights on for security, and our town planner said that no matter the amount of buffers that you put in, there is going to be light pollution. And so I really want to protect the interests of those residents. And one of the reasons that I don't support the distribution and the 24-hour trucking is what's confusing to me is Holmes Road was a posted road, and it just suddenly became unposted because an email was sent by FedEx's developer, and now Holmes isn't posted. So what concerns me is we now have a road that we pay for, and I understand FedEx put money towards it, but we have a road that used to be posted, is no longer posted, and is now going to have 24/7 of distribution trucks going. I think we need to think about our own finances in a way and say, are we going to continue to fund this type of activity out on a road that maybe cannot handle it? So, when we talk about uses, that's another reason why I don't want to support certain uses. I want to limit the amount of use of our facilities, our roads, and things like that. And so I appreciate everything, the conversation with the planning board, but again, that's a very different board into what we are as a council. And, we've been consistently hearing from residents that, they want to be able to enjoy their property just like the way the 7 of us enjoy our properties at night, without beeping, without light and things like that. I would prefer to keep the 7 to the initial hours. If there's going to be a compromise, I would just compromise to keep some sort of form of hours, because I think it tells the residents of Scarborough that we're listening to them, and that if you do have a problem, we are going to respond and listen to you. I don't think the changes that we've made to date are really addressing the issues that residents have come forward through. So I just want to try to reemphasize that we should keep some sort of hours.
Thanks, Karen. Other public comment, other council comment on John's amendment to the hours? Yeah, Councilor Fellows.
Thanks. I spoke earlier, obviously, about being reasonably deferential to the planning board. And certainly, as Councilor Cushing said earlier, the idea is not that we're a rubber stamp and we have to automatically do what any board or committee recommends. As I indicated before, and as I voted, I do generally support the planning board amendment. I have been torn on the hours, and there was some good discussion about that the other night, planning board. I think Councilor Anderson and Councilor Shoup make good points about the importance of being responsive to the existing residents and sort of kind of continuing that spirit of compromise, understanding that inherently any compromise is not perfect. And I think, going, quote, so to speak, against the planning board or modifying the planning board recommendation in this respect, I agree, doesn't diminish them. In fact, it actually vests them with more authority and discretion, because they're going to inevitably have applicants come in and make the case that they should be exempt or that they should have different hours. That may be a different issue that needs to be addressed down the road. And that's part of that ongoing tension that we have with the planning board, because, we don't want it to feel like they're having to sort of negotiate every single time. But given all the circumstances here, I think I'd be comfortable with Councilor Anderson's amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Other council comment on the amendment? Seeing none, I will go ahead and call the vote on John's amendment to modify the hours for trucking, wholesale trade and transportation from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. Correct? Okay. All those in favor? All those opposed? I'll show that as 5-2. Thank you. Returning to the main motion as amended. Is there any further council discussion? Seeing none, I will go ahead and call the vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? Show that as 5-2. Thank you very much. Moving on in our agenda. Order number 25-021 is 7 p.m. public hearing and second reading on the proposed second amendment to the contract zone agreement between Larrabee Farms Wetland Mitigation Project and the town of Scarborough. This is being brought to us from the planning department. Welcome back, Autumn.
Thank you. This is the public hearing and the second amendment. Really, essentially, nothing has changed since your first meeting. I did notice that I thought that the date had gotten changed, but it did not. So we will take care of that before anyone signs the contract zone if it's approved. Tom and I had a follow-up meeting with Mr. Grondin and his wetland scientist just to make sure that we were in good condition for accepting this land. Part of this contract zone will change the zoning to RF and will deed over approximately 130 acres to the town. And we are in good shape for that. And we also have made plans to actually, after this is finalized, we will meet on site with the wetland scientist and our new community services director to really get a good idea of what we can and cannot do with the property. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Questions for Autumn? Okay, at this point, I will open this item for public comment. Anyone wishing to make public comment this evening? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Do I have a motion? Any council discussion? Yeah, Councilor Anderson.
When is Autumn going to make her tree thing so that we can add this to it for the open space?
April 16th.
Oh,
Ooh, there wasn't, that is
Yeah.
exciting.
wasn't expecting an answer. That's great.
We have plans.
Any other council discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Show that is unanimous. Thank you. Order number 25-026 is a 7 PM public hearing and action on the new request for a food handler's license from Antigone Papagica, doing business as Antigone's Pizza, located at 172 US Route 1. This is coming to us from the clerk's office.
This is a new business in town which requires public hearing and action from the council. The application has been reviewed and is in compliance with the ordinance.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone wishing to make public comment? Certainly. Take the podium.
Hi. My name is Antigone Papagica. The business has my name.
Much more beautifully than I stated
Oh,
it.
thank you, thank you. I am first-generation immigrant. Me and my husband won a green card lottery in 1999. We've been here, started our family, had our kids. Our first business is 2003 in Turner, Maine. This is our 5th location. They're all family-owned. One is my brother, one is my sister, one is my daughter, one is my nephew, and one is me. We offer pasta, pizza, salad, and stuff. We love to be here in Scarborough. We were looking forward. My son is going to dental school here, so I just wanted to be closer to him, and we decided to purchase this property and start our business there. We appreciate you guys are working on our license and giving it to us, hopefully, and if that goes through, then Friday morning, we will be opening our doors.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Anyone else wishing to make public comment? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Any council discussion? I know, John Anderson.
I just love pizza. So I'm
Yeah, I
super
mean, we
happy
have to talk about
to have
how,
you here.
and I'm starving.
But
I'm starving.
the best news though is that your location is actually one that I can walk to from my home. So I can like burn the calories on the way there, eat as much pizza, burn them back. So looking forward to you opening.
Seeing no other council discussion, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Show that is unanimous. Thank you and welcome. Order number 25-027 is a 7 PM public hearing and action on the request from Katrina Hallisey, a medical cultivation facility located at 148B Pleasant Hill Road. This is coming to us from the Assistant Town Manager.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is an application, essentially this is an existing licensed business at 148 Pleasant Hill Road. They're proposing just to move their business from adult use cultivation to medical cultivation. There's no increase in canopy or size of the operation. It's just a business decision. So it does require another license to come before council.
Perfect. Anyone have questions for Liam? Is there anyone wishing to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Any council discussion? Okay, I will go ahead and call the vote. All those in favor? Show that as unanimous. Thank you. Order number 25-028 is a 7 PM public hearing and action on the request for a massage therapist license from Kaylee Lippencourt, doing business as Heal Massage and Therapy, located at 51 US Route 1. It's coming to us from the clerk's office.
This is a renewal application. Due to the applicant being 6 months late on the renewal, it does require it to go back to town council for approval.
Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to make public comment? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Any council discussion? I will call the vote. All those in favor? I'll show that as unanimous. Thank you. There is no old business at this time. Moving on to new business. Order number 25-029 is first reading and schedule a public hearing and second reading on the proposed changes to Chapter 311, the Town of Scarborough Schedule of Fees. And this is coming to us from the clerk's office. Oh, thank you, Mr. Manager.
Yes, I'll just provide a couple of words of introduction. The clerk is here with us this evening. This is an annual kind of custom of ours to look at fees. The town clerk being, I think, who she is and new to the position, really took the request seriously and took a very thorough look through all of our fees, but this request and offer was out to all staff. It's not uncommon through the course of the year, 2 or 3 times, sometimes you'll see different changes, and so a number of them have been modernized. I think what the town clerk found in her comparative analysis to other communities is that we certainly want to be competitive and we should be raising them. And so the vast majority are related to the clerk. I believe the police department does have a few fees as well. And I guess the final point is the timing of this really coincides well with the budget. At this point, my proposed budget does include an expectation these fees will go forward. Should you choose not to approve some or all of them, we'll certainly modify as the budget moves forward.
Excellent, thank you. Is there anyone wishing to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Council discussion. Councilor Anderson.
I just
Thank you.
appreciate the work, Kristen, that you did and to look at all these fees and update them. I know that was something that the finance committee had discussed as part of the budget process, that we wanted to make sure we had updated fees because sometimes these come piecemeal. It looks like you did a whole swath review and were able to kind of modernize the fees that we're charging. So I just want to thank you for that so that we can have that as part of the budget process.
Thank you.
Other council discussion. Yes, Councilor Cushing. Certainly.
So these fees have gone some up, some down, is that correct? I'm assuming the fees have changed. That's,
Yeah,
that-
I don't believe any of them went down. There was an increase
they
on
all,
all.
they all went up.
Yeah.
And
Some of them actually stayed the same. We didn't touch, there's a couple that were not strike through at all
Right.
or have any red taxi cabs, coin op. There was a few.
these
throughout.
are fees pertaining to licenses and those types of things, but citizens pay them.
Correct, businesses or license.
And can you explain to me what, was there some guideline or some approach, comparables, those kinds of things? What was you thinking?
Yeah, this was actually a conversation Tody and I have been going back and forth on for about a year and a half, probably, in regards to our fees and what similar municipalities of our size are also charging and how they're handling different things. So essentially what I did is I did a comparison of 9 municipalities that have similar populations to Scarborough. I contacted them all, had conversations with them all about what they're charging, how they're handling things. You know, some of them do them totally different than we do. There was, you know, a couple of these where 2 of us do them the same and the rest do it another way. So I took that into consideration when I put all of these recommendations together.
Sounds like a lot of work. Did you, my last question, any committee input to these fees?
There was not, it was just Tody, myself, staff, and Tom had reviewed them as well.
I see.
Just to put a finer point, the peer communities were Auburn, Biddeford, Brunswick, Lewiston, Saco, Sanford, South Portland, and Westbrook. Again, all within 2,000 or 3,000 in population for comparative purposes.
Right. Wow. Good. Yeah, I think you did a very thorough job. Thank you.
Yeah, Councilor Fellows.
I don't know if this is for the town, for the manager or the clerk, but is there a protocol or a platform that you use to notify the public when fees are adjusted? Is it just that the website gets updated, or is there a?
As a general rule, there isn't, but I think we certainly could. Certainly a number of these categories are very frequent, and we do issue a lot of these licenses. So I think some communication out, advising them of fee changes, at the very least at the time of next renewal, they'll be well aware, but I think doing something proactively would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, we can get that out right away because some of these are coming up for renewal this spring.
Great. I know just anecdotally, and I'm sure all of us have this experience, either ourselves or friends or family go to renew something and say, did you know that they increased the fee to this and that? And we all understand, you know, the rationale. And I would just offer as well that I would imagine there may be some similarities to doing a reval, in that you don't want to let these go for too long and then have to do a big catch up that's going to really create sticker shock. So thank you.
Yeah, Councilor Anderson.
Yeah, maybe just a suggestion to that. A lot of these fees look to be like they impact some businesses, so maybe sharing them with SEDCO. I know
Yeah.
the SEDCO board meets tomorrow. So I can send these and bring them up and just give some visibility to the SEDCO board and get feedback as well.
That's a great suggestion.
And
Other discussion?
Just if it pleases you, there is a spreadsheet that provides all the detailed information that has been gathered. We can share that if that's of interest to you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? I'll show that as unanimous. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Scott. I looked down quickly. Opposed. Scott opposed.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Order number 25-030 is act on the request to terminate the 30-day extension moratorium in the light industrial district. I'm bringing this forward, as promised. We extended the moratorium at our prior meeting to give us coverage for today, essentially. At this point, we have taken action on the recommendations to make amendments to the performance standards in the LI. And so at this point, I will be putting forward a motion to terminate the moratorium. Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't take public comment. There is no public comment. Now I will make my motion.
Second.
Thank you. Council discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor? I show that as unanimous. Thank you. Order number 25-031 is act on the request from the Shellfish Conservation Commission to approve the shellfish allocations for the 2025 season.
I can introduce this
Thank you
one.
very much, Kristen.
So the Shellfish Committee is putting this forward. They did vote to reduce the licenses this year by 2 commercial and 2 student commercial by attrition. However, DMR denied that request due to lack of survey data and due to plenty of landing. And we have Noah Nygren here. He's the chair of the Shellfish Conservation Commission, and Darren Granada is Harbor Master, is on Zoom and is available for questions as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Kristen. At this point, I will open it up to public comment. If you would like to make public comment.
My name's Dave Green again, 135 Beach Ridge Road, and she said it. The Shellfish Committee doesn't do what they're supposed to do and do surveys, and the DMR denied them. They're trying to lower the numbers, thank God, but nobody's got a clue how many clams are out there. And you're all going to vote on it, and you have no information whatsoever. When I was a chairman, Councilor Babine, Councilor Martin, and Peter Hayes all told the Shellfish Committee they wanted data. Well, you know what happened this summer? My grandson's still a commercial digger. I'm not. I retired. Out of the clear blue, one of the guys that's running the project of doing the survey just canceled it. And my grandson's standing down there ready to go do the survey. So there's one survey that didn't happen because somebody was too lazy to go down there and run the operation. When are you going to straighten their act out? The Shellfish Committee's out of control. I'm sorry. They set up projects and they don't show up to do them. That's inexcusable. And you're going to vote on something that you know nothing about because they can't get you any data. All they got to do is go out there and do it, stick their nose in the mud and do surveys. Surveys tells you how much young stuff you've got, how much old stuff you've got, a worm problem, whatever's going on out there. I know you people don't know anything about it, but you're going to vote. Where's the data? That's my question. Where's the data?
Thank you, Mr. Green. Anyone else wishing to make public comment? I see someone has their hand up. Mr. Blanchard? You can, yep,
Can you hear me?
we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, sick. So my name's Andy Blanchard. I'm currently the vice chairman of the committee, and I've been a clammer for like 7 years. So we don't have data at the moment. I think that in the next year or so, we should probably prioritize trying to, have more surveys, but I can let you know of the data that I do have of the landings are published a year previous. So currently we're operating based off of past data. So DMR only sees that last year was a really good year, which it was. But if you look at the data between, August on, it's been like a 50 to 7 or a 30 to 50% decrease in landings, at least for myself. I'm not sure about other people, but there's just not a lot of clams out there this year, and it's going to be a really bad year of clamming. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if landings are down, 50% or something like that. It's just a struggle, because I think the only way of actually proving that would be through surveys that we don't yet have. But yeah, I mean, I think that we should, I don't think we should take away anyone's licenses, but if people don't renew, I think that we should, lower the licenses as was recommended by the committee, and lower the student licenses by the two that already aren't going to be eligible for renewal. But yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. Welcome, Noah.
Hey, should I do a public comment, or do you want me to wait until later? Now? Okay.
Sure.
Noah Nygren, 16 Phillips Street, but I am chair of the Shellfish Conservation Commission. We do have 2 surveys. However, the one on Turner's did get done in May, I believe. And so in May, yes, there was a lot of clams, and the state saw that. And so they did not accept our recommendation based on the better looking data earlier on in the year. Next year, or 2025, so this year, yes, the surveys are probably going to be extremely bad. And unfortunately, the way the state works is it's going to be in 2025 that they see this in the surveys, and then they'll have to possibly approve of a reduction in license numbers. But that would be when we're doing this again in 2026. So I know it's frustrating. Yeah, cutting by 2 and 2 is what should be done. The DMR did not say that we could do that. So we did try. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to make public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Council discussion? Yeah, Councilor Shu, please.
This is one committee that I do feel like is made up of people who do work in that field. I know that at least some of the residents that serve on there are shell fishermen. And so I do rely on them as experts in this. And I know that their liaison is the harbor master, who is also directly in line with the state and all of the regulations and things that are going on there. And so I do appreciate the resident comment, but I think the Shellfish Commission is very in tune with the Scarborough Marsh and our land and what's going on here. And so I would take their recommendation this evening.
Thank you, Councilor Shu. Councilor Anderson?
This is more of a procedural question. So, I mean, we don't have any ability to change what the DMR ultimately recommends, right? Like, I know there's laws surrounding this. So I'm just trying to get clarity of, even though this is what's before us, there's nothing we can do but accept it, because it sounds like we've already tried to build the case for a reduction, but they denied it based on the data that we have. And so, yeah, I would just like to understand a little bit better that.
We're going to bring our harbor master in. Darren, you're unmuted. Yep.
You can hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Councilor Anderson, just to your point, basically, when I sat through the committee, and what we tried to do was a reduction by 2 and 2. In past years, when I was on the committee prior to taking the job on staff, they allowed us to do it through attrition if there was no renewals. This year, they decided and told us that we couldn't do that. So looking at the survey data that we have and the landing numbers from 2024 are quite substantial. And so they're looking at it, they're always a year behind or maybe two behind. And the problem is that we are seeing a large decline. However, we won't catch up with that for a year to the point where this year may be an average year or a lower year. Last year was a very robust harvesting year. So DMR has recommended that we keep the allocation the same. We do know for a fact that 3 of the junior, or I should say, the 2 of the resident student licenses and 1 of the non-resident, we do know that those 3 are not going to renew because they're not eligible due to not being in college anymore. So they were able to dig this past year, but they are not able to renew now. So those will go by the wayside, but the allocation for someone else to take those is still there. So the recommendation, the committee also talked that if we had the ability to only renew, take those 2 student licenses and not renew them, we brought that to DMR, and they still said we would rather make the recommendation to keep the allocation numbers where they're at, and they made the other recommendation to us that potentially we would cut some of the recreational licenses to limit some of the impact on the fishery. I've talked to a lot of clam diggers. I've done this for obviously a long time, but I have sought out some of the clam diggers that have dug these flats for 30, 40 years at this point. And this is kind of like we go through a bell curve where, we'll have 3 or 4 good years and we'll have 1, 2, 3 years. And it goes back and forth. It's an ebb and flow. I will tell you that in preparation for tonight, over the last week or two, I've talked to a lot of clam diggers. There is a lot of seed around. We know that in certain places, but that seed is going to take, 2 or 3 years to generate. So I think we're going to be in a different spot, in 2 or 3 years. But the recommendation from DMR was they would not allow the committee and us to make the recommendation to cut due to not enough survey data and the large volume of landings. But we've made some changes now in the last 6 months since I've been here, 8 months, that we have laid out the conservation year a little more rigorous. We're going to make sure that we're going to bring some recommendations to make sure that we get some more survey data, because survey data is what drives our license numbers.
That was super, super helpful.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
Darren.
you very much, Darren.
You're welcome.
I'm not clear. I just want to make sure the council's clear, but maybe you are. But what is before you, as I understand it, is DMR's recommendation.
Yeah. Yep. Any other council discussion? Yeah, Councilor Doherty.
Yeah, DMR's recommendation is not to. So before us is to say, we have to go with DMR. We can't go against them, but we can go against them if we wanted to.
My understanding is that we are basically in a position of not being able to go against the recommendation of DMR.
Right. It'd be illegal.
Right, there are statutory requirements.
The statutory requirements, because we have a municipal shellfish management plan, DMR regulates that. Anytime we change an ordinance, whether we change paragraphs or we change one sentence, it has to go to DMR for approval, because DMR gives the town of Scarborough the statutory authority to have that ordinance. So we also don't want to, we have to tread this lightly, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you plain, just the way I think of it. As always, I grew up here. I used to be able to go down, when I was a kid, we just go down to Ferry Beach and take clams for supper and bring them home. And then it got so it had to be regulated, and you had to have a license, and you couldn't do it unless you had a license. And now we've got all of this quagmire, and you have a certain amount of diggers that do have a license. And I think that we should have younger kids getting into it. I think that we should allow licenses to be issued. I don't think we should be restricting them. Same with lobstering, they're restricting the licenses, but they do have the students in, and the students should be able to get in. There's gotta be new people coming into the industry, you gotta have new blood coming in and allow them to come in. And it's fishing, it's harvesting, it has its ups and downs, and this year may deter some kids from wanting to do it, and that's usually how it went. It went with, how, when it was good or not good. So I guess I'm saved here, but I still am gonna be honest as to how I feel, because I could have just let it go and say, well, state says it can't do it, we can't do it, but I just think that people should be able to get down there and dig, and I don't think we should limit the residential licenses either. I mean, I think people should be able to go and have access to the water. That's my big thing, is I think everybody should have access. That's the parking fee thing and everything. I mean, I think that people anywhere should have access to the water, and we shouldn't let homeowners be dictating whether people can walk on the beach. I mean, we can go into all kinds of things here with this, but that's my point.
Thank you. Other council discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Show that as unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item number 9 is non-action items. There are no non-action items this evening. Agenda item 10 is standing and special committee reports and liaison reports. Counselor Anderson, would you get us started, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
I haven't had any committee meetings since we last met. We did cancel finance committee meeting because we're anticipating a very busy, few weeks after Tom presents. I will share that I did have the pleasure of attending the school board leadership workshop on their budget that happened yesterday and today. I won't share a bunch of details because I don't want to steal Diane's thunder when she comes and presents, even though I'm the thunder stealer. But I will say that for the most part, it's a very modest, very, very modest budget, probably the most modest budget I've seen them put forward for the 5 years I've been through the budget cycle. So more to come.
Thank you, John. Counselor, Donovan.
The appointments committee met recently, and I'll note the action taken and read for the record what occurred. Coastal Waters and Harbor Advisory Committee appoint Tyler Davis as a full voting member with a term to expire 2025. Brittany Jackson is first alternate with a term to expire 2026. And Matthew Hassler as second alternate with a term to expire 2027. Also, for the Parks and Conservation Land Board, appoint Richard Harvey as first alternate with a term to expire 2027. And J. Anton Boder as second alternate with a term to expire 2027. The School Board Advisory Committee also continues, as I've been reporting at each meeting, to meet. April and I are the town council representatives. And we've actually showed up at every one of these meetings. It's a remarkable performance. I'll leave to April to provide a further update. But I would say we are meeting in the next several weeks, to identify the 2 favorite options of the committee and a location for any new building being proposed. That's it for me.
Thank you. Counselor Fellows.
Thank you. The Rules and Policy Committee has not met since the last update. We had been scheduled to meet this evening. We rescheduled that for next month due to scheduling conflicts. We obviously had the session with our legislative delegation, which was great. We're now scheduled to meet on Wednesday, April 9th at 5 o'clock. And we will get this agenda item addressed on that. Among other things, long-range planning met last Friday, the 14th. The main focus was on indoor firing range provisions. It's a use that the town does not currently have. It's not in the ordinance. As often happens, this was prompted by a prospective applicant, a group out of New Hampshire that runs a couple of these facilities. I believe one's in Dover. So there was some very preliminary discussion led by planning staff. around, safety, noise, things like that. It's sort of a unique use in that in addition to whatever firing goes on inside, it's also ultimately kind of a retail use because they would sell guns and ammunition as well. So all those considerations, and there seemed to be a general consensus around locating those sites in the industrial districts. But those discussions are still preliminary. I anticipate that at some point that would find its way to ordinance and ultimately to the town council, but we'll see how that goes. There was also a little bit of discussion toward the end of the meeting about town council goals to the extent that they have implications for the committee and their work for this year. As was discussed at great length, planning board did meet on Monday night. In addition to providing the advisory opinion on the light industrial district, there was some discussion about a potential zoning change. There's an applicant who was looking to rezone from RF to R2 so that they could build a new home on the property. The board issued a favorable opinion on that, and so we'll see where that goes. And the firing range committee met last night. It was really an introductory meeting just to introduce the new council representative. And there were no particular action items, but I'd anticipate that to the extent the indoor firing range initiative goes forward, that they'd be asked to weigh in at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. From me, Councilor Donovan did a great job summarizing the school building committee. At this point, we have our critical meeting next Monday to determine if this group is able to limit our choices down to potentially 2. And then if that work comes to that conclusion, which anything could happen, then as Councilor Donovan pointed out, then we can really start to hone in on our site selection work that has been happening in parallel on the side. And so I'm really looking forward to Monday night. A tremendous amount of work has gone into leading up to where we are now. And I am feeling really optimistic. It's a big group and it's a lot of parliamentary procedure, it turns out. But aside from the logistics, I really believe that we will end up in a good place. And then the only other thing for me is, as Councilor Donovan pointed out during the break, we kind of ran up against time for our workshop this evening before I had the opportunity to solicit very much input from where the council would like to see us go next in terms of how we interact with our legislative group. And so if you could provide John and I with some next steps or ideas about how you would like to see this body proceed, that would be very helpful for us in future planning in terms of workshops and our time. With that, I will turn it to Karen.
Thank you. So last week, the ordinance committee met and we approved some changes to the EV ordinance, so that should be coming our way. The Community Services Rec Advisory Board met last week as well. They had actually done some work on the animal control ordinance last fall that never moved forward. So we're going to try to put it on the agenda for the May ordinance committee. And the ordinance committee is not meeting in April. And so one of the changes I want to say, one of the changes to the animal control ordinance is some of the timelines for leash laws on the beach. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that we're going to be discussing that in May. And the Community Service Rec Advisory Board spent a substantial amount of time discussing just that the school building steering committee and the new school. And there will be a letter coming from that committee to us and the school and the committee as well. They just really want to emphasize the idea of buying land that would include land for a community center. Me, along with that committee, really feel like you might actually get more support for a school if the idea of a community center down the road would be there. And that board really wants that. And then the Parks and Conservation Land Board met last week as well, and they had the application from the Scarborough Land Trust that they approved. So that should, once we get the final recommendation from that will be coming as well. And that's the first application that we've received for the $6 million land bond.
Thank you. Councilor Cushing.
Communications has nothing to say. We will meet next Wednesday at 5 o'clock.
Perfect. Thank you. Councilor Doherty.
Yeah, I went to the harbor committee. There wasn't a quorum, so we couldn't have a meeting. But it gave me a chance because I hadn't made the last one. And it gave me a chance to introduce myself to the three people that were there and give them my view of the spiel I've been given. So they got an earful and we'll see how it goes. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Item number 11 is council member comments. Does anyone have any parting words this evening? Counselor Don,
I had a great day today.
I had a great day today too.
I took my usual walk on Higgins Beach. A week ago, when I did that, I identified a plover. And I'm one of the recruits that shows up every week to oversee it. I took a picture of it, sent it to Glennis Shabbat, Roger's wife, who runs the program at Higgins. She passed it along to Maine Audubon, and they said it was the first sighting in Maine of a plover this year. So that was pretty exciting in itself. So I went down to the beach again today, as I always do. And I was telling everyone in sight what I had seen. And as I came upon a plover, I'd say, right over there, you could see it. Well, law enforcement, police officer came at me and I pointed and she said, well, I'm the animal control officer. I said, wonderful. And we had a great chat about it. She told me that she would love to be the animal control officer in just Scarborough. And so I said, oh, great. So got off an email to Tom right away, said, I support this. She's a great person. And Tom got right back to me, said, beat you to it. Already got it in the works. She will be recommended for that position as we do our budget in the weeks ahead. And she was as equally excited as I was at not finding just one plover, but 4 plovers on the beach today, 2 of which were a pair, were mating. They were hanging out together, and you can tell if they're usually very independent unless they're together. So it was a fun day out there on the beach for those of us who really enjoy that program of protecting the endangered species, piping plovers.
Thank you, Bill.
I don't want to.
Okay, I don't blame you.
Well, my only comment was, now that we have a town song, I think when we do the committee gathering, I think we all have to like do a chorus together and sing it for them. That's my suggestion.
Yeah.
Solo by Tom, is that what you
hoping
were
for
suggesting?
solo
By Tom?
Yeah.
By anyone.
Emotion, I know.
Yes, Counselor Fellows.
In all seriousness, I do want to thank Counselor Anderson for initiating
Yes.
that.
Yes.
That was a great way to start the meeting. You know, I sons who are out of the Scarborough schools now, but were involved in music, and a couple of them still are. My wife was past co-chair of the band boosters, and so it's great to see continuation of that. It really, you know, unfortunately, music took a hit during COVID, and it's great to see, you know, a new generation coming up, and I hope we'll continue to support them fiscally and otherwise.
Any other council comments? With that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Doug?
All those in favor? Show that it's unanimous. Thank you, everyone.